April 14, 2019, Crescent Ridge, Ohio, United States. The courtroom was suffocating. Not from heat. Not from the packed gallery of reporters, grieving family members, and morbidly curious townsfolk crammed into every available seat. No. The suffocation came from something else entirely. Something invisible but crushing. The weight of a truth that had been buried for 11 brutal months, clawing its way to the surface at last. And at the center of it all, sitting in the witness stand with tears streaming down his hollow cheeks, was a 16-year-old boy named Marcus Webb. His hands trembled against the wooden railing. His voice cracked with every syllable. But his eyes, red-rimmed, exhausted, haunted, never looked away from the defendant's table. Never looked away from the boy he had once called his best friend. His brother in everything but blood. Ethan Mercer. Ethan sat motionless. Dressed in a crisp navy suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his jaw set in stone. He looked like a young senator. A future president. The golden boy everyone in Crescent Ridge had always believed him to be. But his eyes told a different story. Those pale blue eyes, once so charming, so disarming, were locked onto Marcus with a cold, reptilian fury. A silent promise of destruction. A warning that screamed without words. You will regret this. You will pay for this. I will make sure of it. Marcus swallowed hard. His throat felt like sandpaper. The prosecutor, a sharp woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and a voice like a scalpel, stepped closer to the stand. Marcus, she said gently but firmly, I need you to tell the court, in your own words. What did Ethan Mercer confess to you on the night of April 18, 2019? Silence. The entire courtroom held its breath. Reporters leaned forward. Lily Castillo's mother gripped her husband's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. Detective Rena Castillo, Lily's aunt, the woman who had refused to let this case die, sat rigid in the third row, her dark eyes glistening. Marcus opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he spoke the words that would shatter 15 years of friendship. The words that would destroy the boy he had once worshipped. The words that would finally, give Lily Castillo the justice she deserved. He told me. Marcus's voice broke. He took a shaky breath. He told me he killed her. He told me he planned it for weeks. And he told me. A sob escaped his chest. He told me she begged him to stop. And he didn't. The courtroom erupted. Gasps. Sobs. Shouts from the gallery. The judge's gavel slamming repeatedly, demanding order. Lily's mother wailing, a sound so raw, so primal, it didn't seem human. And through it all, Ethan Mercer sat perfectly still. But his mask, that perfect, polished, impenetrable mask he had worn his entire life, finally cracked. Just for a second. Just long enough for the jury to see what lurked beneath. Something empty. Something monstrous. Something that had never been human at all. I want to ask you to do 2 quick things. First, if you're finding this story as compelling as I am, please hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Second, drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I love hearing from viewers all around the world. Let me take you back. Back to before the courtroom. Before the arrest. Before the investigation that would consume an entire town and expose the rot festering beneath its picture-perfect surface. Back to the beginning. Crescent Ridge, Ohio, was the kind of town that existed on postcards. Population 12,000. Tree-lined streets. A charming downtown square with a gazebo where the high school band played on summer evenings. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Where doors were left unlocked. Where children rode their bikes until the streetlights flickered on. Safe. Quiet. Boring in the best possible way. Or so everyone believed. That spring morning, April 14, 2019, the fog rolled in thick and heavy, swallowing the streets in a gray, dreamlike haze. The temperature hovered just above freezing. Frost clung to windshields. Breath misted in the air. The kind of morning that made you want to stay in bed, pull the covers over your head, and pretend the world didn't exist. But the world did exist. And in a few short hours, it would change forever. At Crescent Ridge High School, students shuffled through the front doors with backpacks slung over shoulders and coffee cups clutched in sleepy hands. Conversations buzzed about weekend plans, upcoming exams, the junior prom still 2 months away. Normal teenage concerns. Normal teenage lives. And walking among them, admired, envied, adored, was Ethan Mercer. 15 years old. Sophomore. Youngest member of the varsity debate team in school history. Winner of the state science fair 2 years running. Volunteer at the local food bank. Treasurer of the student council. GPA 4.3. On paper, Ethan was everything a parent dreamed of. Everything a teacher celebrated. Everything a community pointed to and said, "See? This is what our children can become." He had the kind of face that belonged on magazine covers. Sharp cheekbones. A jawline that seemed sculpted rather than born. Those pale blue eyes that sparkled with intelligence and charm. A smile that made girls blush and boys want to be his friend. When Ethan walked through the halls of Crescent Ridge High, people noticed. They always noticed. He commanded attention without demanding it. Drew admiration without seeking it. He was magnetic in a way that felt almost supernatural. Teachers adored him. Parents trusted him. Classmates competed for his approval. He was the golden boy. The pride of Crescent Ridge. The boy who could do no wrong. But here's the thing about golden boys. About prodigies. About children who are told from birth that they are special, exceptional, destined for greatness. Sometimes they believe it too deeply. Sometimes they start to see themselves not as special among others, but as special above others. Superior. Untouchable. Operating by a different set of rules. Rules that don't apply to ordinary people. Rules like empathy. Like conscience. Like basic human decency. Ethan Mercer didn't just believe he was smarter than everyone around him. He believed he was better. And when you believe you're better than everyone else, truly, fundamentally, in your bones believe it, then other people stop being people. They become objects, tools, obstacles, toys to be used and discarded. They become nothing. And doing terrible things to nothing? That's not a crime. That's just existence. Nobody saw it. That's the part that haunts me most when I think about this story. Nobody saw what Ethan really was. Not his parents. Not his teachers. Not the coaches who praised his work ethic or the counselors who marveled at his emotional intelligence. They saw the mask. The perfect, seamless, carefully constructed mask he had worn since childhood. The mask that smiled at appropriate moments. That expressed concern when concern was expected. That charmed and flattered and disarmed anyone who might have looked too closely. Behind that mask, darkness. Cold, calculating, bottomless darkness. But we'll get to that. We'll peel back every layer. We'll trace every step of Ethan Mercer's carefully constructed life until we find the moment it all began to crumble. Because it did crumble. Spectacularly. Publicly. Irreversibly. And the person who brought it all crashing down? The one who finally found the courage to speak the unspeakable truth? It wasn't a detective, though Detective Rena Castillo's relentless investigation played its part. It wasn't a forensic expert, though the evidence they uncovered proved damning. It was a boy. A scared, broken, guilt-ridden 16-year-old boy who had spent nearly a year drowning in a secret too heavy to carry. A boy who had idolized Ethan. Followed him. Trusted him. Loved him like a brother. Marcus Webb. The loyal shadow who finally stepped into the light. The best friend who finally chose truth over loyalty. The witness who walked into that courtroom, looked his former best friend in the eye, and said the words that would put Ethan Mercer away forever. This is that story. The story of a golden boy who thought he was untouchable. The story of a small town that refused to see the monster in its midst. The story of a girl named Lily Castillo, kind, radiant, full of dreams, whose life was stolen in the cold darkness of an April night. And the story of a friendship forged in childhood and shattered by murder. A friendship that became both Ethan's greatest weapon and his ultimate undoing. Are you ready? Good. Because it's about to get dark. The Mercer house sat at the end of Willowbrook Lane like a monument to success. 3 stories of red brick and white columns. Perfectly manicured lawn that looked painted rather than grown. A circular driveway with a marble fountain at its center, a cherub pouring endless water from a pitcher, frozen in eternal service. German luxury cars parked side by side. Imported Italian tiles on the front porch. Crystal chandeliers visible through floor-to-ceiling windows. From the outside, it was the American dream made physical. From the inside, it was a mausoleum. Ethan's father, Richard Mercer, was a corporate attorney. One of the most successful in the state. The kind of man who measured life in billable hours, client acquisitions, and court victories. He worked 16-hour days. Traveled 3 weeks out of every month. And when he was home, truly, physically present in that massive house, he existed in his study behind closed doors, surrounded by case files and single malt scotch. He had wanted a son, an heir, a legacy. What he got was Ethan. And Ethan was perfect. On paper, anyway. The grades. The achievements. The trophies that lined the shelves in the living room like offerings at an altar. Richard would occasionally glance at them during his rare appearances at dinner, nod once in approval, and return to his phone. That nod. That single, wordless acknowledgement. It was the closest thing to affection Ethan ever received from his father. Ethan's mother, Patricia, was a different kind of absence. She was physically present, always home, always drifting through the halls in silk robes and designer slippers, but mentally, emotionally, she had checked out years ago. Anxiety medication, sleep aids, antidepressants, a rotating pharmacy of pills that kept her docile, distant, and perpetually glazed. She had been beautiful once. Vibrant. A former pageant queen who had married into money and slowly discovered that money couldn't buy happiness, fulfillment, or a husband who actually looked at her. Now she was a ghost. She would smile at Ethan sometimes, a vacant, sedated smile, and call him sweetheart or darling in a voice that sounded like it came from underwater. She would sign permission slips without reading them. Write checks for school trips without asking where he was going. Pat his cheek and drift away to her bedroom, where she would sleep for 14 hours straight. Ethan learned something important from his parents. He learned that emotions were transactional. His father's approval came from achievement. His mother's attention came from performance. Love wasn't given freely, it was earned, extracted, won through strategy and effort. And if love was a game, Ethan was determined to master it. The first signs appeared early. Most people missed them, or dismissed them, or actively chose not to see them because seeing them would mean acknowledging something uncomfortable about the golden boy everyone adored. But the signs were there. When Ethan was 7, the family cat disappeared. A gray tabby named Whiskers that Patricia had adopted during one of her brief attempts at normalcy. The cat was found 3 days later in the woods behind the house. Dead. Its body arranged in an almost ceremonial pattern. Paws folded. Eyes closed. A ring of stones surrounding it. Patricia wept. Richard called animal control to dispose of the remains. And when they asked young Ethan if he had seen what happened, he shook his head with wide, innocent eyes. "I loved Whiskers," he said softly. "I hope whoever hurt her gets punished." The case was blamed on a coyote, or a neighbor's dog, or simply one of those tragic mysteries of suburban wildlife. No one asked why there were no bite marks, no signs of struggle, no blood. No one wanted to ask. When Ethan was 10, a classmate named Derek Holloway started spreading rumors that Ethan had cheated on a math test. Derek was a loud, obnoxious kid, the type who made enemies easily, but his accusation wasn't entirely baseless. He claimed he had seen Ethan glancing at his paper during the exam. Ethan didn't fight back, didn't argue, didn't even seem bothered. He simply smiled. 3 weeks later, Derek Holloway was caught with stolen goods from the school store in his backpack. Goods that Derek swore he had never seen before. Goods that had mysteriously appeared between 3rd and 4th period. Derek was suspended. His parents were humiliated. His reputation was destroyed. And Ethan Mercer stood in the hallway, watching Derek's mother drag her sobbing son out of the principal's office, with that same calm, patient smile on his face. No one connected the dots. Why would they? Ethan was the victim here. Poor Ethan, falsely accused by a jealous troublemaker who had clearly been a thief all along. The teacher who had administered the test even apologized to Ethan personally. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," she said, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Some children are just troubled." Ethan nodded solemnly. "I forgive him," he said. "I just hope he gets the help he needs." The teacher nearly cried at his maturity. Behind his pale blue eyes, something cold and satisfied watched her believe every word. By middle school, Ethan had perfected his craft. He understood, on a level most adults never achieve, that human beings were predictable. They wanted to believe the best about attractive, successful, well-spoken people. They wanted to trust their instincts, and their instincts told them that good-looking kids with good grades and good manners were, by definition, good. This was Ethan's superpower. He knew what people wanted to see, what they wanted to hear, what emotions to perform, what expressions to wear, what words to deploy in any given situation. He studied people the way entomologists study insects. Their habits, their weaknesses, their pressure points, the invisible strings that, when pulled correctly, made them dance exactly how he wanted. Teachers were easy. Compliment their teaching style. Ask thoughtful questions. Stay after class to discuss assignments. Make them feel seen, appreciated, special. In return, they would overlook late homework, round up grades, write glowing recommendation letters. Parents were even easier. Firm handshake. Direct eye contact. "Yes, sir," and "No, ma'am." Ask about their jobs, their hobbies, their children's achievements. Make them feel respected. In return, they would invite him to dinners, trust him with their sons and daughters, never suspect him of anything. Classmates required more nuance. Different masks for different groups. The jocks got confident, slightly crude humor. The nerds got intellectual banter and shared complaints about mainstream ignorance. The popular girls got charm, flirtation, the sense that they were the only one in the room. The outcasts got quiet kindness, small gestures of inclusion that made them pathetically grateful. Everyone got a version of Ethan tailored specifically to their desires. No one got the real thing. Because the real thing, the cold, empty void beneath all those carefully constructed masks, would have terrified them. There were moments, though. Brief flickers when the mask slipped. Marcus Webb saw one when they were 13. They had been best friends for years by then. Inseparable since kindergarten, when Marcus, shy, anxious, desperate to belong, had been crying alone on the playground after some older kids stole his lunch money. Ethan had appeared like a guardian angel. Chased the bullies away. Sat with Marcus on the swings. Shared his own lunch without being asked. From that day forward, Marcus belonged to Ethan. He didn't realize it at the time. Didn't understand that Ethan collected people the way other kids collected baseball cards. That Marcus's gratitude, his loyalty, his desperate need for approval made him the perfect acquisition. But on that summer afternoon when they were 13, Marcus caught a glimpse of something that would haunt him for years. They were in Ethan's backyard, near the edge of the woods. They had found a bird, a small sparrow, with a broken wing, flopping helplessly in the grass. Marcus had wanted to help it. Take it to a vet. Build a little box and nurse it back to health. But Ethan had picked it up first. And the way he held it, there was no tenderness, no compassion. He held it like a scientist examining a specimen, turning it over, studying its panicked fluttering, watching its tiny heart beat visibly beneath its feathers. "It's scared," Marcus said nervously. "We should." "It's dying," Ethan interrupted calmly. "Nothing we do will change that." His thumb pressed against the bird's chest. Gently at first, then harder. Marcus watched in frozen horror as Ethan's expression remained utterly blank. Those pale blue eyes observed the bird's final struggles with clinical detachment. No pleasure. No guilt. Just curiosity. When it was over, Ethan dropped the small body onto the grass. Nature, he said simply. Everything dies eventually. Why pretend otherwise? He turned to Marcus with that familiar, charming smile, as if a switch had been flipped, as if the previous 30 seconds had never happened. Want to go get ice cream? My treat. Marcus nodded numbly. He never mentioned the bird again. He buried the memory so deep he almost convinced himself it hadn't happened. Almost. But memories like that don't stay buried forever. They fester. They whisper. They wait. And years later, when Marcus finally found the courage to walk into that police station, trembling, terrified, carrying the weight of unspeakable knowledge, that memory of the sparrow was the first thing that surfaced. The first proof, buried deep in his mind, that Ethan Mercer had never been what he pretended to be. That behind the perfect grades and perfect smile and perfect golden boy image, there had always been something wrong. Something broken. Something that looked at living creatures, birds, cats, classmates, friends, and saw nothing but objects to be used, studied, and discarded. Marcus had known. Deep down, in that primal part of the brain that senses predators even when the eyes see nothing threatening, Marcus had always known. He just hadn't wanted to believe it. None of them had. And that willful blindness, that desperate desire to believe in the mask rather than confront the monster beneath, would cost Lily Castillo her life. But we're not there yet. We're still in the before. Still watching the pieces move into position. Still tracing the path that led from a troubled childhood to an unthinkable crime. Because understanding Ethan Mercer, truly understanding how a 15-year-old boy could plan and execute a murder with cold, methodical precision, requires understanding what made him. The absent father who taught him that love was earned through achievement. The hollow mother who taught him that emotions were performances. The teachers and neighbors and community who taught him that a convincing mask was more valuable than genuine character. Ethan didn't become a monster overnight. He was shaped, molded, crafted by a world that rewarded his deception and punished his authenticity. Does that excuse what he did? Absolutely not. But it explains it. And explanation is the first step toward understanding. And understanding is the first step toward making sure it never happens again. The mask was perfect. But even perfect masks eventually crack. And when Ethan Mercer set his sights on Lily Castillo, kind, perceptive, impossible to manipulate Lily Castillo, he unknowingly chose the one person who would see right through him. The one person who would refuse to play his game. The one person whose rejection would ignite a fury so cold, so absolute, that it could only end one way. In blood. In darkness. In the fog-shrouded woods behind Crescent Ridge High School. Marcus Webb learned early that the world was not a safe place. His first memory, the one that crystallized before all others, sharp and immovable, was the sound of his father's truck pulling out of the driveway at 3 in the morning. The growl of the engine. The crunch of gravel. The red taillights disappearing into darkness and never coming back. He was 4 years old. He stood at his bedroom window in Superman pajamas, clutching a stuffed dinosaur named Rex, watching his family dissolve in real time. His mother's sobs echoed from downstairs. His baby sister wailed in the next room. And Marcus stood frozen, understanding nothing and everything at once. Daddy was gone. Daddy wasn't coming back. And somehow, in the illogical way that children's minds work, Marcus decided it was his fault. If he had been better, quieter, less needy, less annoying. If he hadn't cried when his father yelled. If he hadn't spilled juice on the carpet last week. If he had been a better son, a worthier son, maybe Daddy would have stayed. This belief, this toxic, corrosive, utterly false belief, would burrow into Marcus's psyche like a parasite. It would shape every relationship he ever formed. Every decision he ever made. Every desperate, self-destructive attempt to earn love he already deserved but could never accept. Marcus Webb was 4 years old when he learned that love was conditional. That belonging had to be earned. That he was fundamentally, irreparably not enough. And no amount of therapy, self-help books, or well-meaning reassurances would ever fully dislodge that splinter from his heart. His mother, Diane Webb, did her best. She really did. After Marcus's father vanished. No note, no forwarding address, no child support checks. Diane picked up the shattered pieces of her life and rebuilt them through sheer, stubborn willpower. She worked double shifts at the diner on Route 12. Picked up weekend cleaning jobs at the office complex downtown. Took night classes in accounting when Marcus was old enough to babysit his sister. She was exhausted. Constantly, bone-deep, soul-crushing exhausted. But she kept moving, kept providing, kept telling Marcus and his sister that they were loved, that they were wanted, that none of this was their fault. Marcus heard the words. He just couldn't believe them. Because if he was truly loved, truly wanted, truly blameless, why did his mother cry herself to sleep every night? Why did she wince when unexpected bills arrived in the mail? Why did she sometimes stare at Marcus with an expression that looked almost like grief? He couldn't understand, wouldn't understand until much later, that her grief wasn't about him. It was about the life she'd lost. The partnership that had abandoned her. The exhausting, relentless grind of single motherhood in a society designed to punish it. But young Marcus, with his 4-year-old logic calcified into unshakable conviction, saw only confirmation. He was a burden. He had to earn his place. He had to be useful, helpful, agreeable, invisible when necessary, or risk being left behind again. School was a minefield. Marcus was small for his age. Skinny. Anxious in a way that practically painted a target on his back. He flinched at sudden movements. Apologized constantly, for existing, for taking up space, for imaginary offenses no one had noticed. He laughed too eagerly at jokes he didn't understand. Agreed with opinions he didn't share. Molded himself into whatever shape seemed least likely to provoke rejection. Bullies sensed this like sharks sense blood. The older kids on the playground discovered that Marcus would hand over his lunch money without resistance. That he would absorb insults without fighting back. That his desperate need for approval made him the perfect victim, the kind who would never tell a teacher, never retaliate, never risk making anyone angry. For the first few months of kindergarten, Marcus's life was a daily gauntlet of small cruelties. Stolen snacks. Accidental shoves. Whispered taunts just quiet enough for teachers to miss. He endured it all in silence. And then, one crisp September afternoon, everything changed. The memory was seared into Marcus's mind with perfect clarity. He was huddled behind the big oak tree near the edge of the playground, tears streaming down his cheeks, trying to muffle his sobs so no one would hear. Tommy Barker, a stocky third grader with mean eyes and a meaner laugh, had just stolen Marcus's lunch money for the 3rd time that week. This time, he'd also shoved Marcus into the dirt and called him a crybaby loser whose daddy ran away because he was too pathetic to love. The words had hit harder than the shove. Because some part of Marcus believed they were true. He was pathetic. He was unlovable. His father had seen it and fled. His mother was stuck with him. And everyone else, the teachers, the students, the entire world, would eventually figure it out and leave him too. He sobbed into his knees, small body shaking with a grief too large for his 5-year-old frame. And then a shadow fell over him. Hey! Marcus looked up, startled, expecting another bully. Another tormentor. Another person ready to confirm everything he already believed about himself. But it wasn't a bully. It was a boy his age. Maybe slightly taller. Dark hair neatly combed. Pale blue eyes that studied Marcus with an intensity that felt almost clinical. A face that was somehow already handsome, already composed, already radiating a strange, magnetic confidence. Ethan Mercer. Tommy Barker took your money? Ethan asked. Not with sympathy exactly. More like assessment. Gathering information. Marcus nodded, too startled to speak. Wait here. Ethan turned and walked toward the playground with calm, purposeful strides. Marcus watched, frozen, as Ethan approached Tommy Barker, a kid twice his size, a known terror, a third grader who made kindergartners tremble. Marcus couldn't hear what Ethan said, but he saw Tommy's expression shift. Confusion, then annoyance, then, incredibly, something like fear. Ethan never raised his voice, never clenched his fists. He simply spoke, quietly and steadily, inches from Tommy's face. 30 seconds later, Tommy Barker walked over to the oak tree, shoved a crumpled dollar into Marcus's hand, mumbled something that might have been an apology, and fled. He never bothered Marcus again. No one did. Ethan returned, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeves, looking utterly unbothered. "Come on," he said. "They're serving chocolate milk at lunch today. I'll share mine with you." And just like that, Marcus Webb had a best friend. The friendship was everything Marcus had ever wanted. Finally, he belonged to someone. Had someone who chose him, sat with him, defended him. Someone who made the loneliness bearable. Someone who made the world feel slightly less hostile. Ethan was magnetic, confident, endlessly fascinating. He knew things Marcus didn't, about science, about history, about the secret ways the world worked. He had ideas for games and adventures that turned ordinary afternoons into epic quests. He spoke to Marcus like an equal, like a partner, like someone whose opinion actually mattered. It was intoxicating. Marcus attached himself to Ethan with the desperate gratitude of a drowning man clutching a life preserver. He would do anything, to maintain this connection, to prove himself worthy of Ethan's attention, to ensure that this one precious relationship didn't slip through his fingers like his father had. He became Ethan's shadow, his echo, his most devoted audience. When Ethan wanted to explore the woods behind the school, Marcus followed without question. When Ethan wanted to skip class, Marcus provided cover stories. When Ethan spoke, Marcus listened with rapt attention. When Ethan needed something, anything, Marcus materialized to provide it. And Ethan? Ethan accepted this devotion as his natural due. He never demanded it explicitly. Never threatened Marcus or coerced him. He simply expected it. The way a king expects tribute. The way a sun expects planets to orbit around it. Their friendship was not a partnership of equals. It was a hierarchy. Ethan at the top, brilliant, untouchable, the center of everything. Marcus below, grateful, anxious, perpetually terrified of falling out of favor. And somehow, in the twisted logic of Marcus's wounded psyche, this felt right. This felt safe. Because at least in this arrangement, the rules were clear. He knew what he had to do to maintain his place. He knew how to be useful, how to be valuable, how to avoid abandonment. All he had to do was everything Ethan asked. Simple. Sustainable. And for years, almost a decade, it worked. But there were moments. Flickers of unease that Marcus quickly buried, instinctively smothered, refused to examine too closely. The bird with the broken wing. Ethan's blank expression as he crushed it. The casual way he'd suggested ice cream afterward, as if nothing had happened. Marcus remembered. He just chose not to think about it. There were other moments, too. The time in 7th grade when Ethan convinced a socially awkward girl named Megan that he liked her. Spent weeks building her hopes up, notes passed in class, lingering glances in the hallway, a single perfect rose left in her locker. Megan walked on air. Told her friends. Started planning what to wear to the spring dance. Then Ethan publicly rejected her in the cafeteria. Laughed at her trembling confession. Called her delusional in front of half the school. Megan transferred 2 weeks later. Marcus had felt sick watching it. Sick and wrong and horrified. But when he'd tentatively raised the subject later, "Hey, don't you think that was kind of harsh?" Ethan had fixed him with those pale blue eyes. Cold. Assessing. The faintest edge of warning. "She needed to learn," Ethan said flatly. "People who reach above their station always get hurt. I taught her a valuable lesson. She should thank me." And the look in his eyes, the utter lack of remorse, the reptilian certainty, made Marcus's next words die in his throat. He dropped the subject. He never brought it up again. He filed the memory away with the bird and the stolen goods planted in Derek Holloway's backpack and all the other small cruelties he'd witnessed and willfully ignored. Because acknowledging them would mean questioning the friendship. And questioning the friendship would mean risking abandonment. And abandonment was the one thing Marcus could not survive. Not again. So he stayed. He stayed through middle school, watching Ethan manipulate and discard classmates like chess pieces. He stayed through the transition to high school, watching Ethan's charm grow more polished, his masks more seamless, his control over those around him more absolute. He stayed because he didn't know who he was without Ethan. Because the thought of being alone again, truly alone, with no one to belong to, no purpose to fulfill, was more terrifying than any of the doubts whispering in the back of his mind. He stayed because Ethan was his son, and shadows cannot exist without light. But something shifted their sophomore year. Something that cracked the foundation Marcus had built his entire identity upon. Her name was Lily Castillo. And the moment Ethan saw her, really saw her, something changed in those pale blue eyes. Something hungry and obsessive flickered to life. Marcus noticed. He always noticed everything about Ethan. And for the first time in almost a decade of friendship, Marcus felt something cold and terrible settling in his stomach. Fear. Not fear of Ethan exactly. Fear of what Ethan might do. And fear of what Marcus might have to choose when the moment finally came. He didn't know it yet, couldn't possibly imagine the horror that was coming, but that cold settling fear was the first crack. The first fracture in the loyalty that had defined his entire existence. The beginning of the end. Lily Castillo was sunshine made human. That's how everyone described her. Teachers. Classmates. The elderly woman at the grocery store where Lily bagged produce on weekends. The kids at the community center where she volunteered Tuesday afternoons. Even people who barely knew her, who had only passed her in the hallway or stood behind her in the lunch line, felt compelled to use the same word. Sunshine. Warmth. Light. It wasn't just her appearance, though she was beautiful in an effortless, unassuming way. Wavy dark hair that fell past her shoulders. Warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. A scattering of freckles across her nose that made her look perpetually approachable. She wore minimal makeup, preferred thrift store sweaters over designer labels, and had a collection of worn-out Converse sneakers in every color imaginable. But Lily's beauty wasn't what made her remarkable. It was her presence. When Lily Castillo walked into a room, the atmosphere shifted. Not dramatically. She wasn't loud or attention-seeking or theatrical. It was subtler than that. Gentler. Like a warm breeze on a cold morning. Like the first sip of hot chocolate after playing in the snow. She made people feel seen. That was her gift. In a world where everyone was shouting to be heard, competing for attention, curating perfect versions of themselves for social media consumption, Lily did something radical. She listened. Really listened. She asked questions and waited for the answers. She remembered small details. Your dog's name, your sister's birthday, that test you were nervous about last week. She looked at you when you spoke, not through you, not past you, not at her phone. She made you feel like you mattered. And in a high school full of teenagers drowning in insecurity, desperate for validation, starving for genuine connection, that simple act of presence was revolutionary. Lily was 17 years old. A senior. 1 year ahead of Ethan and Marcus in the rigid hierarchy of Crescent Ridge High School. She should have been invisible to them, just another upperclassman counting down the days until graduation. But Lily wasn't invisible to anyone. She had transferred to Crescent Ridge the previous year, arriving midway through her junior year after her father's job relocated the family from Portland, Oregon. New kids usually struggled. The social ecosystems of small-town high schools were notoriously hostile to outsiders. Cliques were established. Hierarchies were calcified. Breaking in required either exceptional social skills or brutal determination. Lily needed neither. She simply belonged. Within weeks of her arrival, she had somehow become friends with everyone. The athletes respected her because she showed up to games and cheered genuinely, not performatively. The theater kids adored her because she helped paint sets and never sought credit. The academic overachievers appreciated her because she organized study groups and shared notes without expecting anything in return. She tutored underclassmen for free. Visited the nursing home on Maple Street every Sunday. Fostered kittens for the local shelter. Organized clothing drives for families in need. She did these things quietly, without fanfare, without posting about them on social media, without expecting recognition or reward. She was good. Genuinely, uncomplicatedly, almost impossibly good. And that goodness radiated from her like heat from a bonfire. Her family was close-knit and loving in a way that felt almost old-fashioned. Her father, Miguel Castillo, was a gentle giant of a man, broad shoulders, easy laugh, the kind of dad who coached Little League and cried at his daughter's school plays. Her mother, Elena, was warm and practical, filling their modest home with the smell of homemade tamales and the sound of old salsa records. Lily had a younger sister, Sophia, who was 12 and worshipped the ground Lily walked on. She had an aunt, Rena, who had moved to Crescent Ridge a decade earlier and served as a detective on the local police force. The Castillo family dinners were loud, chaotic, full of laughter and arguments and fierce, unconditional love. They were the kind of family that Ethan Mercer had never experienced. The kind of warmth he couldn't understand. The kind of genuine connection that made his carefully constructed masks feel like the cheap imitations they were. And perhaps that was part of why Lily fascinated him so much. She was everything he pretended to be, but real, authentic, effortless. She didn't perform kindness for strategic advantage. She didn't calculate the social return on every gesture of generosity. She simply cared. About everyone. Without agenda. It was alien to him. Infuriating. Irresistible. Ethan first noticed Lily in the library. It was a Thursday afternoon in late September. Marcus remembered the day clearly because it was the first time he had seen Ethan genuinely caught off guard. They were supposed to be studying for a history exam, but Ethan was distracted, unusual for someone whose focus was typically laser-sharp. His pale blue eyes kept drifting toward the far corner of the library, where a group of freshmen huddled around a table, struggling with algebra worksheets. And sitting among them, patient as a saint, was Lily Castillo. She was explaining quadratic equations in a way that made the freshmen' stressed faces gradually relax. She used her hands when she talked, drew little diagrams on scratch paper, laughed at her own silly analogies. One of the freshmen, a gangly kid with braces and visible acne, asked a question that was probably stupid. Lily didn't roll her eyes. Didn't sigh. She leaned in, listened carefully, and explained it again with even more patience. The gangly kid smiled for the first time all afternoon. Lily smiled back like she had just received a gift. "Who is that?" Ethan asked. His voice was strange, flat but intense, hungry in a way Marcus had never heard before. "Lily Castillo," Marcus answered, glancing at his friend. "She's a senior. Transferred last year from Oregon or something. She tutors kids after school. Everyone says she's really nice." "Nice," Ethan repeated, like he was testing the word for hidden meanings. His eyes never left Lily. Marcus felt a flicker of something uncomfortable in his chest. Not jealousy exactly. Something colder. More instinctive. Warning bells he didn't know how to interpret. Over the following weeks, Ethan's interest in Lily intensified. He started appearing wherever she was likely to be. The library. The cafeteria. The hallway outside her classes. He positioned himself strategically, always casual, always coincidental-looking, but Marcus knew better. Ethan never did anything by accident. He gathered information like an intelligence operative. Lily's schedule. Her friend groups. Her habits. Her family. Her weekend routines. Her favorite coffee order at the cafe downtown. Her preferred running route through the park. He knew which classes she struggled with. Which teachers she liked. Which music she listened to. Which movies she quoted. He studied her. And then he made his move. It started subtly, a smile in the hallway, a friendly wave, a casual compliment about her presentation in the class they shared as a TA and student. Ethan was charming. Effortlessly, devastatingly charming. The same charm that had won over teachers and parents and classmates for 15 years. Most girls would have been flattered. Most girls would have blushed and giggled and felt special that the golden boy had noticed them. Lily wasn't most girls. She was polite, friendly, perfectly cordial. But she didn't melt. She didn't blush or stammer or rearrange her schedule to bump into him. She treated Ethan the same way she treated everyone else, with warmth, yes, but also with a kind of serene detachment that he couldn't penetrate. And when he finally asked her to grab coffee one Saturday afternoon, a move that had never once failed him, Lily had tilted her head slightly, studied his face for a long moment, and said something that stopped him cold. "That's really sweet of you, Ethan. But I don't think that's a good idea." No excuse. No elaborate explanation. No apologetic softening. Just, no. Marcus was there. He saw it happen. They were in the hallway outside the gym, and Marcus was pretending to check his phone while actually watching every micro-expression on Ethan's face. And what he saw terrified him. For just a fraction of a second, so brief that anyone else would have missed it, Ethan's mask slipped completely. The charming smile vanished. The warmth drained from his eyes. What remained was something cold. Something ancient. Something that looked at Lily Castillo not with disappointment or embarrassment, but with the calculating fury of a predator whose prey had unexpectedly slipped the trap. Then the mask was back. Seamless as ever. "No problem at all," Ethan said smoothly. "I totally understand. Maybe some other time." Lily smiled, that genuine, uncomplicated smile she gave everyone, and walked away. She didn't look back. She had no idea what she had just done. But Marcus knew. He had seen enough over the years to recognize the danger signs. Ethan didn't handle rejection. Ever. Not because he was fragile or insecure. His ego was titanium-plated, impervious to ordinary disappointment. No. Ethan didn't handle rejection because rejection was not supposed to happen to him. He was special. He was above the rules that governed ordinary people. He chose who was worthy of his attention, and the chosen ones were supposed to be grateful, honored, compliant. For someone to look at him, really look at him, the way Lily had, and say no? That wasn't just rejection. That was defiance. That was an insult to the natural order of his universe. That was unacceptable. In the days following Lily's refusal, Ethan became obsessed. He didn't talk about it openly. Didn't rant or rage or betray any obvious signs of wounded pride. But Marcus, attuned to Ethan's moods with the sensitivity of a prey animal watching a predator, noticed the changes. The way Ethan's jaw tightened whenever Lily's name came up in conversation. The way his eyes tracked her through crowded hallways with unsettling intensity. The way he collected information about her with renewed fervor, not to win her over anymore, but to understand her. To find the cracks in her armor. To identify whatever weakness might eventually bring her under his control. And beneath it all, simmering like magma beneath a dormant volcano, something darker. Resentment. Hatred. A cold, patient fury that Lily had dared to see through him when everyone else was fooled. That she had looked at his perfect mask and somehow sensed the void beneath. That she had rejected not just his invitation but his entire carefully constructed identity. She had made him feel ordinary. Mortal. Powerless. And for Ethan Mercer, that was the one unforgivable sin. Marcus tried to tell himself it would pass. Ethan would find a new interest. A new target. A new game to occupy his brilliant, restless mind. He always did. The obsessions burned hot and then faded, replaced by something else, someone else. But weeks passed. Then months. And Ethan's fixation on Lily only intensified. He stopped talking about it entirely. A bad sign, Marcus realized too late. When Ethan talked about things, processed them verbally, he was working through them. When he went silent, it meant the thoughts had migrated somewhere deeper. Somewhere inaccessible. Somewhere dangerous. Marcus watched. And worried. And said nothing. Because what could he say? What evidence did he have beyond instinct and unease? Ethan hadn't done anything wrong. Hadn't threatened anyone. Hadn't made any overt moves. He was just watching, waiting, planning. And Lily, sweet oblivious Lily, had no idea that she had become the target of something monstrous. She continued her tutoring sessions. Her volunteer work. Her effortless glide through senior year, beloved by everyone, anchored by family and friends, dreaming of college and a career helping people. She was sunshine made human. And she had no idea that a shadow was gathering at her back. Growing darker. Growing colder. Growing hungry. The obsession metastasized slowly. Like a cancer spreading through healthy tissue, Ethan's fixation on Lily Castillo grew quietly, invisibly, consuming more and more of his mental landscape while the surface remained perfectly composed. To teachers, parents, and classmates, he was the same golden boy he had always been. Charming, accomplished, destined for greatness. But Marcus saw the truth. He saw the way Ethan's phone was always open to Lily's social media profiles. The way her name appeared in his search history over and over and over again. The way he had memorized her schedule so completely that he could predict her location at any moment of any day. He saw the notebook. Ethan kept it hidden in the false bottom of his desk drawer, the kind of secret compartment you'd expect from a spy movie, not a 15-year-old honor student. Marcus had stumbled upon it by accident one afternoon when Ethan was in the bathroom and Marcus was looking for a pen. What he found made his blood run cold. Pages and pages of notes. Detailed observations about Lily's routines. Her running schedule. Her tutoring hours. The route she walked home. The times her parents left for work. The nights her Aunt Rena worked late shifts. And interspersed among the observations, darker entries. Fragments of rage disguised as analysis. She thinks she's better than everyone. She thinks she can see through people. She thinks she's special. She's not special. She's ordinary. She just hasn't realized it yet. Someone needs to teach her. Someone needs to show her what happens to people who think they're above the rules. Marcus had closed the notebook with trembling hands, replaced it exactly as he found it, and never mentioned it to anyone. Not because he didn't understand what it meant, but because understanding would require action. And action would require betraying Ethan. And betraying Ethan was still, in that moment, unthinkable. Winter arrived in Crescent Ridge with bitter winds and early darkness. The town transformed into a postcard of small-town Americana. Christmas lights on every storefront, a massive tree in the town square, carolers on weekends, the smell of pine and cinnamon drifting from every open door. Lily Castillo loved this time of year. She organized a toy drive for underprivileged kids. Volunteered extra hours at the community center wrapping gifts. Baked cookies with her mother and sister, filling their modest home with warmth and laughter. She was happy, blissfully, dangerously unaware of the storm gathering around her. Ethan watched it all. He attended the same community events, positioned himself at the same gatherings, smiled and charmed and played his role while his pale blue eyes tracked Lily's every movement. He was patient, methodical. The anger that had flared after her rejection had cooled into something far more dangerous, calculated determination. He wasn't going to win her over. That ship had sailed. He was going to destroy her. And the plan, still formless, still gestating in the darkest corners of his mind, began to take shape. The research started in January. Ethan had always been technologically sophisticated, building computers, coding programs, navigating the internet's hidden corners with the ease of a digital native. But now his skills turned toward darker applications. He created anonymous accounts, accessed forums he had no business visiting, downloaded guides he should never have read. How to avoid leaving DNA evidence. Common mistakes criminals make that lead to their capture. Forensic countermeasures for the intelligent perpetrator. The psychology of police investigations. How to misdirect suspicion. He studied these materials the same way he studied for academic competitions, with total focus, meticulous note-taking, and relentless attention to detail. He absorbed information about fiber transfer, shoe print analysis, cell phone triangulation, alibi construction. He learned about the golden hour, the critical first 60 minutes after a crime when investigators gathered the most useful evidence. He learned about witness psychology and how memory degraded over time. He learned about the mistakes that separated criminals who got caught from those who never did. And gradually, horrifyingly, the formless storm in his mind crystallized into something concrete. A plan. A perfect, methodical, foolproof plan. The location was obvious. The woods behind Crescent Ridge High School stretched for nearly 200 acres, a dense tangle of oak and pine that the town had preserved as a nature area. Hiking trails wound through the trees, but they were poorly maintained and rarely used, especially after dark. More importantly, the woods were isolated. No security cameras. No regular patrols. No houses within earshot. Ethan had explored them extensively over the years, mapping the terrain with the precision of a military strategist. He knew which trails connected to which neighborhoods, which clearings were visible from the road, which sections were so overgrown that a person could disappear completely. He chose a spot near the creek, a small clearing surrounded by dense brush, accessible only through a narrow path that most hikers overlooked. The ground was soft there, easy to disturb if necessary. The water would help mask sounds. It was perfect, remote, silent, forgotten. The timing required more thought. Ethan studied Lily's schedule with obsessive precision, looking for the optimal window, a moment when she would be alone, accessible, and unlikely to be missed for several crucial hours. He found it in her tutoring schedule. Every Wednesday evening, Lily tutored a group of freshmen at the public library until 7 p.m. Afterward, she usually walked to the cafe on Main Street, grabbed a hot chocolate, and read for an hour before heading home. Her parents expected her by 9 p.m. but rarely worried if she was slightly late. A 2-hour window. More than enough time. But there was a problem. The library was in the opposite direction from the woods. There was no logical reason for Lily to venture anywhere near that isolated clearing on a Wednesday evening, unless someone gave her one. The lure came to Ethan in the middle of a history lecture. He was sitting in class, half listening to Mr. Patterson drone about the Industrial Revolution, when the idea crystallized with perfect clarity. Lily wanted to help people. It was her defining characteristic, her need to nurture, to guide, to make a difference. She couldn't resist someone in distress, couldn't ignore a plea for assistance. It was her greatest strength, and it would be her fatal weakness. Ethan would create a fictional student, a troubled freshman too embarrassed to seek tutoring publicly. Someone who needed private help with a difficult subject. Someone who requested a discreet meeting in an unusual location because they were ashamed of their academic struggles and terrified of being judged. Lily would never refuse such a request. She would see it as an opportunity to help. She would walk willingly into the trap. But there was still one loose end. Ethan needed an alibi. A perfect crime required a perfect explanation for his whereabouts. If anyone asked where he was on the night in question, he needed an unshakable, verifiable answer. And for that, he needed Marcus. The manipulation was elegant in its simplicity. Ethan didn't ask Marcus to cover for a crime. He didn't reveal anything about his true intentions. Instead, he crafted a story so perfectly tailored to Marcus's psychology that his best friend never thought to question it. "I need a favor," Ethan said one afternoon, catching Marcus alone in the parking lot after school. His voice was casual, almost embarrassed, a tone Marcus had rarely heard from his perpetually confident friend. "What's up?" Marcus asked, instantly alert. Ethan asking for favors was unusual enough to warrant attention. "There's this girl," Ethan began, looking away as if uncomfortable. "Senior. You don't know her. She goes to Lincoln High, in the next county. We've been texting for a while, and she wants to meet up." Marcus blinked. "That's great, I think. Why do you need my help?" Ethan sighed, a perfectly calibrated sound of teenage frustration. "Her ex-boyfriend is psycho. Like, legitimately dangerous. Restraining order and everything. She's scared he'll find out she's seeing someone new and freak out. So we've been keeping things super secret." "Okay," Marcus said slowly, still not understanding. "She wants to meet Wednesday night. In person. But if anyone asks where I was, my parents, teachers, whatever, I need you to say we were hanging out at your place. Studying for the chemistry test." He finally met Marcus's eyes, and his expression was sheepish, vulnerable, a masterful performance of teenage romantic desperation. "I know it's weird to ask, but I really like her, man. And I don't want her psycho ex showing up and ruining everything. Please." Marcus hesitated. Something about the request felt off. Ethan didn't date. Ethan didn't develop genuine feelings for anyone. Ethan certainly didn't ask for help with romantic entanglements. But then again, maybe Ethan was finally opening up. Finally showing the vulnerability he kept hidden behind all those masks. Finally trusting Marcus with something personal and real. And wasn't that what Marcus had always wanted? To be trusted? To be needed? To be essential to his best friend's life? The warnings whispered in the back of his mind. Marcus silenced them. "Yeah," he said finally. "Yeah, of course. Whatever you need." Ethan smiled, that warm, grateful smile that made Marcus feel valued and important and chosen. "Thanks, man. You're the best. Seriously." He clapped Marcus on the shoulder and walked away, already pulling out his phone to finalize details. And Marcus stood alone in the empty parking lot, trying to ignore the cold weight settling in his stomach. The date was set. April 14th. A Wednesday. The weather forecast predicted fog and cold, perfect conditions for what Ethan had planned. The moon would be new, offering minimal light. The woods would be dark and silent. Everything was falling into place. Ethan reviewed his preparations with the precision of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. Gloves, leather, purchased with cash 3 towns over, never worn before. Dark clothing without distinctive logos or patterns. A burner phone purchased months earlier, used only to create the fictional tutoring student. A route through the woods that avoided all populated areas. He had accounted for everything. Forensic evidence. Witness timelines. Alibi verification. Digital footprints. He was too smart to get caught. Too careful. Too brilliant. That was his fatal flaw. Not the planning itself, which was, admittedly, sophisticated beyond his years. Not the execution, which would proceed with terrifying precision. His fatal flaw was simpler. More human. More ancient. Arrogance. Ethan Mercer believed, with absolute certainty, that he was smarter than everyone around him. Smarter than the police who would investigate. Smarter than the community that would mourn. Smarter than any system designed to catch criminals. And more importantly, more fatally, he believed he was smarter than Marcus Webb. He saw Marcus as a tool. A useful instrument. A loyal servant whose gratitude and neediness made him infinitely controllable. He never considered the possibility that Marcus might think for himself. That Marcus might question. That Marcus might eventually choose truth over loyalty. That the desperate, broken boy he had cultivated since kindergarten might one day find the courage to destroy him. It never even crossed his mind. And that blind spot, that contemptuous dismissal of the one person who knew him best, would ultimately be his undoing. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. In April 2019, the trap was set. The pieces were in position. And Lily Castillo, kind, trusting, generous Lily, had no idea that she was walking toward the worst night of her life. The night everything changed. For her. For Marcus. For Ethan. For the entire town of Crescent Ridge. And there was no going back. Before we continue down this dark path, I need to ask you something. Are you still with me? Are you following every twist, every detail, every heartbreaking step toward tragedy? If this story is gripping you the way it should, take a second to hit that like button. Drop a comment. Share this with someone who appreciates a true psychological thriller. Because what comes next? What happens on the night of April 14th? It's going to haunt you. I promise you that. April 14th, 2019. The fog rolled into Crescent Ridge like a living thing. It crept through the streets in thick, gray waves, swallowing streetlights, muffling sounds, transforming the familiar town into something alien and unsettling. By late afternoon, visibility had dropped to less than 50 feet. Cars crawled along Main Street with headlights blazing. Pedestrians hurried home, collars turned up against the damp chill that seeped through every layer of clothing. The temperature hovered just above freezing. The kind of cold that didn't bite, it seeped. It worked its way into your bones gradually, almost politely, until you realized you were shivering and couldn't remember when it had started. Perfect weather for staying inside. Perfect weather for secrets. Perfect weather for what Ethan Mercer had planned. Lily Castillo finished her tutoring session at the library at exactly 7:03 p.m. The freshman she'd been helping, 3 nervous kids struggling with pre-algebra packed up their books with visible relief. One of them, a shy girl with thick glasses, lingered to thank Lily for her patience. "I actually understand it now," the girl said, almost wonderingly. "Like, really understand it. Not just memorizing steps." Lily smiled, that warm, genuine smile that made everyone feel like the most important person in the room. "You did the hard work. I just helped you see what was already there." The girl beamed and hurried off to meet her mother in the parking lot. Lily gathered her own belongings slowly. Her worn canvas backpack, the thermos of tea her mother had prepared that morning, a dog-eared copy of To Kill a Mockingbird she was rereading for the 100th time. She checked her phone. One new message. The number was unfamiliar, but the name attached to it was one she recognized. A freshman named Tyler Morrison, who had reached out 2 weeks earlier, desperate for help with his English essay. He'd explained, in painfully awkward texts, that he couldn't come to the library tutoring sessions because he was embarrassed. Because the other kids would laugh. Because his older brother had been a star student and Tyler couldn't bear the comparisons. The manipulation was elegant in its simplicity. Ethan didn't ask Marcus to cover for a crime. He didn't reveal anything about his true intentions. Instead, he crafted a story so perfectly tailored to Marcus's psychology that his best friend never thought to question it. "I need a favor," Ethan said one afternoon, catching Marcus alone in the parking lot after school. His voice was casual, almost embarrassed, a tone Marcus had rarely heard from his perpetually confident friend. "What's up?" Marcus asked, instantly alert. Ethan asking for favors was unusual enough to warrant attention. "There's this girl," Ethan began, looking away as if uncomfortable. "Senior. You don't know her. She goes to Lincoln High, in the next county. We've been texting for a while, and she wants to meet up." Marcus blinked. "That's great, I think. Why do you need my help?" Ethan sighed, a perfectly calibrated sound of teenage frustration. "Her ex-boyfriend is psycho. Like, legitimately dangerous. Restraining order and everything. She's scared he'll find out she's seeing someone new and freak out. So we've been keeping things super secret." "Okay," Marcus said slowly, still not understanding. "She wants to meet Wednesday night. In person. But if anyone asks where I was, my parents, teachers, whatever, I need you to say we were hanging out at your place. Studying for the chemistry test." He finally met Marcus's eyes, and his expression was sheepish, vulnerable, a masterful performance of teenage romantic desperation. "I know it's weird to ask, but I really like her, man. And I don't want her psycho ex showing up and ruining everything. Please." Marcus hesitated. Something about the request felt off. Ethan didn't date. Ethan didn't develop genuine feelings for anyone. Ethan certainly didn't ask for help with romantic entanglements. But then again, maybe Ethan was finally opening up. Finally showing the vulnerability he kept hidden behind all those masks. Finally trusting Marcus with something personal and real. And wasn't that what Marcus had always wanted? To be trusted? To be needed? To be essential to his best friend's life? The warnings whispered in the back of his mind. Marcus silenced them. "Yeah," he said finally. "Yeah, of course. Whatever you need." Ethan smiled, that warm, grateful smile that made Marcus feel valued and important and chosen. "Thanks, man. You're the best. Seriously." He clapped Marcus on the shoulder and walked away, already pulling out his phone to finalize details. And Marcus stood alone in the empty parking lot, trying to ignore the cold weight settling in his stomach. The date was set. April 14th. A Wednesday. The weather forecast predicted fog and cold, perfect conditions for what Ethan had planned. The moon would be new, offering minimal light. The woods would be dark and silent. Everything was falling into place. Ethan reviewed his preparations with the precision of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. Gloves, leather, purchased with cash 3 towns over, never worn before. Dark clothing without distinctive logos or patterns. A burner phone purchased months earlier, used only to create the fictional tutoring student. A route through the woods that avoided all populated areas. He had accounted for everything. Forensic evidence. Witness timelines. Alibi verification. Digital footprints. He was too smart to get caught. Too careful. Too brilliant. That was his fatal flaw. Not the planning itself, which was, admittedly, sophisticated beyond his years. Not the execution, which would proceed with terrifying precision. His fatal flaw was simpler, more human, more ancient. Arrogance. Ethan Mercer believed, with absolute certainty, that he was smarter than everyone around him. Smarter than the police who would investigate. Smarter than the community that would mourn. Smarter than any system designed to catch criminals. And more importantly, more fatally, he believed he was smarter than Marcus Webb. He saw Marcus as a tool, a useful instrument, a loyal servant whose gratitude and neediness made him infinitely controllable. He never considered the possibility that Marcus might think for himself, that Marcus might question, that Marcus might eventually choose truth over loyalty, that the desperate, broken boy he had cultivated since kindergarten might one day find the courage to destroy him. It never even crossed his mind. And that blind spot, that contemptuous dismissal of the one person who knew him best, would ultimately be his undoing. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. In April 2019, the trap was set. The pieces were in position. And Lily Castillo, kind, trusting, generous Lily, had no idea that she was walking toward the worst night of her life. The night everything changed. For her. For Marcus. For Ethan. For the entire town of Crescent Ridge. And there was no going back. Before we continue down this dark path, I need to ask you something. Are you still with me? Are you following every twist, every detail, every heartbreaking step toward tragedy? If this story is gripping you the way it should, take a second to hit that like button. Drop a comment. Share this with someone who appreciates a true psychological thriller. Because what comes next? What happens on the night of April 14th? It's going to haunt you. I promise you that. April 14th, 2019. The fog rolled into Crescent Ridge like a living thing. It crept through the streets in thick, gray waves, swallowing streetlights, muffling sounds, transforming the familiar town into something alien and unsettling. By late afternoon, visibility had dropped to less than 50 feet. Cars crawled along Main Street with headlights blazing. Pedestrians hurried home, collars turned up against the damp chill that seeped through every layer of clothing. The temperature hovered just above freezing. The kind of cold that didn't bite, it seeped. It worked its way into your bones gradually, almost politely, until you realized you were shivering and couldn't remember when it had started. Perfect weather for staying inside. Perfect weather for secrets. Perfect weather for what Ethan Mercer had planned. Lily Castillo finished her tutoring session at the library at exactly 7:03 p.m. The freshmen she'd been helping, 3 nervous kids struggling with pre-algebra, packed up their books with visible relief. One of them, a shy girl with thick glasses, lingered to thank Lily for her patience. "I actually understand it now," the girl said, almost wonderingly. "Like, really understand it. Not just memorizing steps." Lily smiled, that warm, genuine smile that made everyone feel like the most important person in the room. "You did the hard work. I just helped you see what was already there." The girl beamed and hurried off to meet her mother in the parking lot. Lily gathered her own belongings slowly. Her worn canvas backpack. The thermos of tea her mother had prepared that morning. A dog-eared copy of To Kill a Mockingbird she was rereading for the 100th time. She checked her phone. One new message. The number was unfamiliar, but the name attached to it was one she recognized. A freshman named Tyler Morrison, who had reached out 2 weeks earlier, desperate for help with his English essay. He'd explained, in painfully awkward texts, that he couldn't come to the library tutoring sessions because he was embarrassed. Because the other kids would laugh. Because his older brother had been a star student and Tyler couldn't bear the comparisons. She fought because she was brave. She fought because her family was waiting for her at home. She fought because 17 years of life had taught her that existence was precious, that every moment mattered, that giving up was never an option. She fought. And in the end, it wasn't enough. Ethan stood over her body for a long moment, breathing heavily. Not from exertion. The act itself had been quick, efficient, clinical.
No.
He was breathing heavily from something else. Something that looked almost like satisfaction. He had planned for this moment. Rehearsed it mentally. Anticipated every variable and contingency. But the reality exceeded even his expectations. The power. The control. The absolute, godlike authority over another human being's existence. It was intoxicating. For the first time in 15 years, Ethan Mercer felt something resembling genuine emotion. Not happiness exactly. Not pleasure in the traditional sense. But a deep, primal fulfillment, like scratching an itch that had tormented him since childhood. He felt complete. He felt real. He felt like himself. The cleanup was methodical. Ethan had prepared extensively, and his preparations paid dividends. He wore gloves, no fingerprints. His clothing was dark and nondescript, no distinctive fibers. He had walked to the clearing through a route that avoided cameras and witnesses. He arranged the scene carefully. Not to hide what had happened. Concealing a body in these woods would be nearly impossible, and discovery was inevitable. Instead, he staged the scene to mislead. To suggest a random attack by an unknown assailant. To point investigators in every direction except toward him. He removed Lily's phone, the one with the texts from Tyler Morrison, and crushed it beneath his boot. The pieces went into the creek, scattered across a quarter-mile of flowing water. He checked his own clothing for blood, for torn fabric, for any trace evidence that might connect him to this place. He found nothing. He had been careful. So careful. Finally, he took one last look at Lily Castillo. She looked smaller in death. Fragile. The sunshine that had animated her, that ineffable warmth that made everyone love her, was gone. What remained was just a body. Just matter. Just an object that no longer served any purpose. Ethan felt nothing. No regret. No guilt. No second thoughts. She had seen through him. She had rejected him. She had needed to be taught a lesson. And now the lesson was complete. He walked home through back routes, avoiding streetlights and late-night joggers. The fog was his ally, thick and impenetrable, swallowing his dark figure as he moved through the sleeping town. He reached his house at 9:47 p.m., slipping through the back door with practiced silence. His mother was upstairs, sedated as always. His father was in Chicago, closing a deal that wouldn't wait. The house was empty. Ethan showered meticulously, scrubbing every inch of skin even though he had avoided direct contact with blood. He placed his clothing in a plastic bag, to be disposed of later, in a dumpster 3 towns over. He brushed his teeth, combed his hair, put on fresh pajamas. Then he climbed into bed. He set his alarm for 6:30 a.m. And he slept. Deeply. Dreamlessly. The sleep of a boy with absolutely nothing on his conscience. The next morning, Ethan Mercer ate breakfast with his mother. She drifted into the kitchen at 8 a.m., wrapped in her silk robe, eyes glazed from her nightly cocktail of medications. She smiled vaguely at Ethan, patted his cheek, and poured herself coffee she would forget to drink. "Good morning, sweetheart," she murmured. "Did you sleep well?" "Great, Mom," Ethan said, buttering his toast. "Really great." "That's wonderful, darling." She drifted back upstairs, leaving Ethan alone with his cereal and his thoughts and the secret that no one else in the world knew. He took a bite of toast. He checked his phone, 3 texts from Marcus, asking about a history assignment. He smiled. Everything was going exactly according to plan. And somewhere in the fog-shrouded woods behind Crescent Ridge High School, Lily Castillo's body lay undiscovered. Waiting. Surrounded by silence. Surrounded by cold. Surrounded by the indifferent trees that had witnessed her final moments and would never speak of what they had seen. She had been sunshine made human. Now she was gone. And the boy who had extinguished her light was eating breakfast, planning his day, already rehearsing the performance of shock and grief he would deliver when the inevitable discovery came. The monster was loose. And no one knew. Not yet. The scream shattered the morning stillness at 6:47 a.m. Margaret Chen was 53 years old. A retired accountant who jogged the woodland trails every morning, rain or shine, as she had done for the past decade. She knew these woods intimately, every root, every curve, every clearing where deer sometimes gathered at dawn. She was not prepared for what she found. The fog had lifted overnight, replaced by a pale gray morning that cast everything in muted, colorless light. Margaret had taken her usual route, the loop that wound past the creek, through the old oak grove, and back toward the parking lot where her Honda Civic waited. She almost missed it. The clearing was slightly off the main trail, obscured by overgrown brush that most joggers hurried past without a second glance. But something caught Margaret's eye. A flash of color. Bright blue fabric visible through the tangle of branches. She stopped. Curiosity warred with caution. Curiosity won. She pushed through the brush, muttering about litterers and teenagers who used the woods for drinking parties. She expected to find discarded clothing, maybe an abandoned tent, perhaps evidence of some illicit rendezvous. What she found instead would haunt her for the rest of her life. Lily Castillo lay on her back in the center of the clearing. Her eyes were open, fixed on the gray sky above. Unseeing. Empty. Her dark hair spread around her head like a halo, matted with leaves and dirt and something darker that Margaret's mind refused to identify. Her skin was pale, almost blue in the morning light. Her lips were slightly parted, as if she had been trying to speak when the end came. She was still wearing her school clothes. Jeans. A blue sweater. Those worn Converse sneakers she loved so much. She looked like she was sleeping, except for the stillness. Except for the complete, terrible absence of movement. Except for the obvious, undeniable truth that no living person looked like this. That the thing in the clearing was no longer Lily Castillo but merely the shell she had left behind. Margaret Chen screamed. The sound tore from her throat without conscious thought, a primal, animal response to horror too great for rational processing. She stumbled backward, tripping over roots, barely catching herself before falling. Her hands shook so violently she could barely grip her phone. She dialed 911. And the nightmare began. Within an hour, the woods behind Crescent Ridge High School were transformed into a crime scene. Yellow tape cordoned off a perimeter extending 50 yards in every direction. Police cruisers lined the access road, their lights flashing in silent rotation. Officers in dark uniforms moved through the trees with grim purpose, marking evidence, photographing footprints, speaking in low tones that carried an unmistakable weight. Detective Rena Castillo arrived at 7:32 a.m. She wasn't supposed to be there. Conflict of interest. Emotional involvement. Standard protocols that any seasoned investigator would understand and respect. But when the call came through, body discovered in the woods, female, teenager, appears to be a student. Something in Rena's chest had turned to ice. Some primal instinct, honed by years of police work and a lifetime of loving her family, had whispered a terrible truth before her conscious mind was willing to accept it. She had driven to the scene in a daze. Pushed past the officers who tried to stop her. Ducked under the yellow tape with the authority of someone who would not be denied. And then she saw. Rena Castillo was 41 years old. She had been a cop for 18 years. Worked homicide in Cleveland before transferring to Crescent Ridge to be closer to her brother's family. She had seen death in all its forms. Brutal, peaceful, accidental, intentional. She had learned to compartmentalize, to separate the job from the personal, to process horror without letting it consume her. None of that training prepared her for this moment. Lily. Her niece. Her brother's daughter. The little girl she had taught to ride a bike. The teenager who called her every Sunday just to chat. The young woman who reminded Rena so much of herself at that age. Fierce and kind and determined to make the world better. Lily was dead. Murdered. Left in the cold dirt like garbage. Rena's knees buckled. She would have fallen if a fellow officer hadn't caught her, guided her away from the scene, pressed a bottle of water into her trembling hands. Voices swirled around her, concerned, professional, sympathetic, but she couldn't process the words. Couldn't process anything except the image burned into her retinas. Lily's eyes. Open. Empty. Staring at nothing forever. The news spread through Crescent Ridge like wildfire. By noon, everyone knew. Parents gathered children close, their own mortality suddenly, terrifyingly real. Teachers wept in break rooms, struggling to compose themselves before facing classrooms full of shocked, grieving students. Businesses closed early. Churches opened their doors for impromptu prayer services. The town that had felt so safe, so insulated from the horrors of the wider world, had been violated in the most terrible way imaginable. One of their own was gone, and nothing would ever be the same. At Crescent Ridge High School, the announcement came during second period. Principal Morrison's voice crackled over the intercom, strained, unsteady, stripped of its usual bureaucratic composure. Students fell silent in their seats, instinctively recognizing that whatever came next would be bad. "Students and staff," the principal began, "it is my deeply painful duty to inform you that one of our own has been taken from us. Lily Castillo, a senior and beloved member of our community, was found deceased this morning. Counselors will be available throughout the day. Classes are suspended effective immediately. Please hold each other close during this terrible time." The intercom clicked off. Silence. Then the sobs began. Girls who had laughed with Lily at lunch last week. Boys who had secretly loved her from afar. Freshmen she had tutored with endless patience. Seniors who had known her since middle school. The grief was universal, overwhelming, suffocating. Students hugged each other in hallways. Teachers abandoned pretenses of control and wept openly. Someone started a memorial in front of Lily's locker. Flowers, notes, photographs, candles that violated fire codes but that no administrator had the heart to remove. The school became a shrine, and in the midst of the chaos, watching it all with carefully performed anguish, was Ethan Mercer. He was magnificent. That's the only word for his performance that terrible day. Absolutely, horrifyingly magnificent. Ethan moved through the grieving crowds with perfect grace. His eyes glistened with unshed tears. His voice trembled with carefully calibrated emotion. He hugged sobbing classmates, offered comforting words to devastated teachers, stood in silent solidarity at Lily's locker memorial. He was the picture of a sensitive young man shattered by tragedy. "I can't believe it," he murmured to a group of students gathered in the commons. "Lily was she was so good, so kind. Who would do something like this?" His voice cracked on the last word. A girl he barely knew wrapped her arms around him, crying into his shoulder. "I know," she sobbed. "I know. It's so horrible." Ethan held her, rubbing her back, making soothing sounds. Over her shoulder, his pale blue eyes scanned the room, calculating, assessing, ensuring that his performance was being observed by the right people. It was. Teachers noted his compassion. Students admired his emotional strength. The whisper network that governed high school social dynamics began spreading word of Ethan Mercer's grace under pressure. Such a good kid. So mature for his age. Lily would have been proud to have him as a friend. The irony was exquisite. The boy who had extinguished Lily's light was now basking in the reflected glow of her memory, feeding on the grief he had caused, playing the role of mourner while the actual mourners had no idea they were embracing a monster. Marcus watched from across the room. He stood alone near the vending machines, forgotten in the chaos, observing Ethan work the crowd with growing unease. Something was wrong. Marcus couldn't identify it precisely, couldn't point to any single detail that proved his suspicion, but something about Ethan's grief felt off. Too polished. Too perfect. Like a performance rehearsed in front of a mirror until every gesture was flawless. Marcus had seen Ethan perform before. Had watched him charm teachers, manipulate classmates, construct elaborate facades that fooled everyone around him. This was the same. The trembling voice. The glistening eyes. The comforting touches. It was all calculated. All designed for maximum emotional impact. But why? Why would Ethan need to perform grief over someone he barely knew? Lily was a senior. Ethan was a sophomore. Their interactions had been minimal. A few hallway encounters, maybe a shared class period as TA and student. There was no reason for Ethan to be this devastated. Unless. Marcus's mind recoiled from the thought. No. Impossible. Ethan was many things. Cold, calculating, occasionally cruel, but he wasn't capable of what had happened to Lily. That was something else entirely. Something monstrous. Something inhuman. Ethan was his best friend. His protector. His only real connection in the world. Marcus couldn't believe it. He refused to believe it. So he buried the suspicion. Pushed it down into the same mental vault where he kept the memory of the sparrow, the planted evidence in Derek Holloway's backpack, all the small cruelties he had witnessed and chosen to ignore. But suspicions don't stay buried. They fester. They grow. And eventually, they claw their way to the surface. That evening, the Castillo family gathered at Miguel and Elena's house. The home that had always been so full of laughter, so warm with the smell of cooking and the sound of music, was now silent. Heavy. Oppressive with grief that no words could express. Elena sat on the couch, staring at nothing, her face a mask of shock that hadn't yet given way to full comprehension. Miguel paced the living room, stopping occasionally to stare at photographs of Lily that smiled down from every wall. Sophia, 12 years old and too young to understand death on any meaningful level, clung to her mother and cried. And Rena. Rena sat in the kitchen, alone, staring at her hands. She had removed herself from the official investigation, Captain's orders, and she knew he was right. But being removed from the case didn't mean she could turn off her investigator's mind. Didn't mean she could stop analyzing, questioning, searching for answers. Who had done this? Who had taken her niece, her bright, beautiful, impossibly good niece, and snuffed her out like a candle? The preliminary forensic report offered few clues. No fingerprints. No DNA under Lily's fingernails despite obvious signs of struggle. No witnesses. No surveillance footage. No convenient trail of evidence leading straight to a suspect. Whoever had done this was careful. Methodical. Smart. That scared Rena more than anything. Crimes of passion left evidence. Impulsive killers made mistakes. But this felt different. Planned. Orchestrated by someone who had thought through every variable. Someone local, most likely. Someone who knew the woods. Knew Lily's schedule. Knew exactly where to lure her and exactly how to avoid detection. Someone who was still out there. Walking the streets of Crescent Ridge. Maybe attending vigils for the girl he had killed. Maybe offering condolences to the family he had destroyed. Rena's hands clenched into fists. She would find him. Whatever it took. However long it required. She would find the monster who had done this, and she would make him pay. For Lily. For her family. For the entire community that had been poisoned by this act of evil. Justice would come. Rena would make sure of it. Outside, the fog had returned. It rolled through the streets of Crescent Ridge like a funeral shroud, muffling sounds, obscuring stars, transforming the grieving town into a gray and ghostly landscape. And somewhere in that fog, Ethan Mercer walked home from the candlelight vigil that had formed spontaneously in the town square. He had given a beautiful speech. Talked about Lily's kindness, her generosity, her impact on everyone she met. His voice had broken at all the right moments. Tears had streamed down his cheeks as he lit a candle and placed it among the hundreds of others. The crowd had been moved. Some had openly sobbed. Many had approached him afterward to thank him for his words, to marvel at his emotional maturity, to express gratitude that young people like him existed in a world that could produce such evil. Ethan had accepted their praise with humble grace. And now, walking home through the fog, he allowed himself a small, private smile. Everything was proceeding perfectly. The investigation was stalled. The community was focused on mourning rather than suspecting. His alibi was secure. Marcus would confirm they had been studying together Wednesday night, and no one would question it. He had gotten away with it. He was untouchable. He was exactly what he had always believed himself to be. Smarter than everyone around him, operating on a level they couldn't comprehend, playing a game where only he knew the rules. The golden boy of Crescent Ridge. Perfect. Invincible. Above suspicion forever. But the universe has a way of balancing scales. And the first crack in Ethan's perfect facade was already forming. Not in the forensic evidence he had so carefully avoided. Not in the investigation he had so thoroughly anticipated. But in the one variable he had failed to consider. The one person he had dismissed as too loyal, too broken, too dependent to ever turn against him. His best friend. His shadow. His ultimate undoing. Marcus Webb. Detective Rena Castillo was officially off the case. Captain Harold Webb, no relation to Marcus, had made that abundantly clear during their tense meeting the morning after Lily's body was discovered. Standard protocol. Conflict of interest. Emotional involvement that could compromise the investigation and provide defense attorneys with ammunition to challenge any eventual prosecution. Rena understood. She hated it, but she understood. "I need you to step back," Captain Webb had said, his weathered face etched with genuine sympathy. "Not because I doubt your abilities. You're the best investigator I've got. But because this case needs to be bulletproof. When we catch the bastard who did this, I want zero chance of him walking on a technicality." When he had said, "Not if." Rena appreciated that. "I'll step back from the official investigation," she had replied, her voice carefully controlled. "But I won't stop being a cop. And I won't stop being Lily's aunt." Captain Webb had studied her for a long moment, reading between the lines, understanding exactly what she was saying. "Just don't do anything that compromises the case," he said finally. "And don't do anything that gets you killed." Rena had nodded once and walked out. Stepping back didn't mean stepping away. The official investigation was assigned to Detective Marcus Cole and Detective Priya Sharma, both competent, experienced investigators who took the case with the gravity it deserved. Their first 72 hours were a whirlwind of activity. Canvassing the neighborhood around the woods. Interviewing everyone who had seen Lily in the days before her death. Collecting surveillance footage from nearby businesses. Analyzing the crime scene with forensic precision. The results were frustrating. No fingerprints at the scene. The killer had worn gloves, leather, based on the texture impressions left on Lily's clothing. No DNA evidence despite clear signs of struggle. Lily had fought back. Skin cells and blood under her fingernails suggested she had scratched her attacker, but the samples were degraded by exposure to the elements. Contaminated. Virtually unusable. No witnesses had seen anything unusual in the woods that night. The fog had been too thick, the hour too late, the location too isolated. Lily's phone was missing. Cell tower data showed it had been active near the crime scene until approximately 7:45 p.m., then went dark permanently. Either destroyed or disabled. The killer had been careful. Too careful for a crime of opportunity. This was premeditated. Planned by someone who understood forensic investigation, who had studied police procedures, who knew exactly what evidence to avoid leaving behind. Detective Cole said it best during their third-day briefing, "We're not looking for some random psycho. We're looking for someone smart. Someone local. Someone who knew Lily and knew these woods." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Someone local. Someone who knew Lily. The suspect pool had just narrowed to virtually everyone in Crescent Ridge. The initial focus fell on the obvious suspects. Lily's ex-boyfriend, Jason Morales, was interviewed first. They had dated briefly sophomore year, broken up amicably, remained friends. Jason had an alibi. He was at a basketball tournament in Columbus with 15 witnesses and hotel receipts to prove it. He cried during the interview, genuinely devastated, clearly innocent. Next came Derek Sullivan, a registered sex offender living 2 towns over who had been seen near Crescent Ridge the week before Lily's death. His presence seemed suspicious until his parole officer confirmed that Derek had been wearing an ankle monitor that placed him 40 miles away on the night of the murder. Dead end. Then there was Marcus Webb's older cousin, Tyler, who had a history of drug offenses and had once been seen arguing with Lily at a party. Tyler was questioned intensively until he produced credit card receipts showing he had been buying gas in Pittsburgh, a 4-hour drive away, at the time of Lily's death. One by one, the obvious suspects were eliminated. And with each elimination, the investigation grew colder. Rena watched from the sidelines, gathering information through unofficial channels. She had friends on the force. Colleagues who owed her favors. access to case files that she technically shouldn't have been reading. Every night, after Miguel and Elena and Sofia had finally succumbed to exhausted sleep, Rena sat at her kitchen table and studied the evidence. Or rather, the lack of evidence. Forensic countermeasures. Deliberate misdirection. A crime scene staged to suggest random violence while hiding premeditated execution. This wasn't luck. This was planning. Sophisticated, methodical planning that suggested an intelligence far beyond the typical criminal profile. Rena's instincts whispered that they were looking in the wrong places. That the answer wasn't out there among drifters and ex-boyfriends and registered offenders. That it was closer. Much closer. But where? She started reviewing Lily's life with new eyes. Her schedule. Her routines. Her relationships. The people she interacted with regularly. The places she went. The patterns that defined her days. Lily tutored students at the library on Wednesday evenings. That was well known. But she had told Elena she was meeting a student privately that night, someone who needed extra help but was too embarrassed to come to the regular sessions. A student no one had heard of. A meeting that no one could verify. Rena pulled up Lily's phone records, the last backup synced to the cloud before her phone was destroyed. There were text messages from an unknown number. Someone named Tyler Morrison, asking for private tutoring help, expressing embarrassment about his academic struggles, requesting a meeting at a specific location. The clearing by the creek. Exactly where Lily's body was found. Rena felt her pulse quicken. The killer had lured her. Used Lily's own kindness against her. Created a fictional student in distress, knowing that Lily would never refuse someone who needed help. This wasn't random. This was someone who knew Lily. Understood her psychology. Had studied her closely enough to craft the perfect trap. Rena began cross-referencing the unknown phone number with local carriers. It was a burner, prepaid, purchased with cash, activated only weeks before the murder. The trail went cold almost immediately. But the methodology remained. Someone had researched this, planned this, executed this with the precision of a military operation. Someone young, Rena suspected. The texting style in the Tyler Morrison messages was distinctly teenage. The abbreviations, the emoji usage, the particular rhythms of adolescent communication. An adult trying to impersonate a teenager would likely miss those subtle markers. A student, then. Someone at Crescent Ridge High School. Someone who had access to Lily. Knew her schedule. Understood her psychology. Someone hiding in plain sight. Rena started attending school events. Officially, she was there to support the grieving community. To represent Lily's family at memorials and vigils and counseling sessions. No one questioned her presence. She was the victim's aunt, after all. Her grief was visible and genuine. But behind that grief, her investigator's eyes never stopped watching. She observed the students carefully. Their reactions. Their body language. The way they spoke about Lily, moved through the halls, interacted with each other. Most of them were genuinely devastated. Teenagers lack the emotional calluses that adults develop over time. They feel loss deeply, openly, without the filters that age provides. The grief at Crescent Ridge High School was real and raw and heartbreaking. But Rena wasn't looking for grief. She was looking for performance. And on the third day, she found it. Ethan Mercer caught her attention during a school assembly dedicated to Lily's memory. The principal had invited students to share memories, and several had taken the stage with tearful tributes. Then Ethan stepped up to the microphone, a sophomore, younger than most of the speakers, but carrying himself with unusual poise. His speech was beautiful. He talked about Lily's kindness, her dedication to helping others, the way she made everyone feel seen and valued. His voice cracked at precisely the right moments. His eyes glistened with unshed tears. He paused for emotional effect, gathered himself, continued with visible courage. The audience was moved. Many openly wept. Teachers nodded approvingly, whispering about what a mature, compassionate young man Ethan was. But Rena saw something different. She had interviewed hundreds of witnesses over her career, questioned grieving family members, traumatized survivors, guilty perpetrators trying to act innocent. She had developed an instinct for the genuine versus the performed, a sixth sense that tingled when something was off. And watching Ethan Mercer speak, that instinct screamed. His timing was too perfect. His gestures too calculated. His emotional beats too precisely placed. He wasn't feeling grief, he was executing grief, following a script he had written and rehearsed until every moment was flawless. It was a masterpiece of performance. And it made Rena's blood run cold. After the assembly, she found an excuse to approach him. "That was a beautiful tribute," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Rena Castillo, Lily's aunt." Ethan's expression shifted instantly. Surprise, sympathy, humble gratitude. "Detective Castillo, I'm so sorry for your loss. Lily was—" He paused, swallowing visibly. "She was special. Everyone knew it. Did you know her well?" "Not as well as I wish I had." His eyes dropped, a picture of regret. "She tutored in the library sometimes when I was studying. We talked a few times. She was always so kind. So patient. Even with the younger students who asked stupid questions." A small, sad smile. "She never made anyone feel stupid." Textbook humility. Textbook deflection. Rena nodded, her face revealing nothing. "Were you close to her? Socially, I mean." "Not really," Ethan admitted. "She was a senior, I'm a sophomore. Different circles, you know. But everyone admired her. She was the kind of person you wanted to be around, even if you were too shy to approach her." Again. Perfect. Relatable. Completely ordinary. But something flickered behind those pale blue eyes. Something cold. Something watching. Measuring Rena the same way she was measuring him. "If you remember anything," Rena said, pressing a card into his hand, "anything at all that might help, please call me. Sometimes the smallest detail can break a case open." Ethan took the card with solemn gratitude. "Of course, Detective. Anything I can do to help. I want whoever did this to pay. We all do." He held her gaze for a moment, steady, sincere, unblinking. Then he excused himself and melted into the crowd. Rena watched him go, memorizing his posture, his gait, the way he moved through the other students like a shark through minnows. She had no evidence. No probable cause. Nothing but instinct and a lifetime of reading people. But she knew. Deep in her bones, she knew. Something was wrong with Ethan Mercer. That night, she ran his name through every database she could access. Honor Roll student. Debate champion. Community volunteer. Not so much as a parking ticket. His record was spotless. Impossibly, suspiciously spotless for a teenage boy in modern America. His family was wealthy. Father a corporate attorney, frequently out of town. Mother rarely seen in public, rumored to have health issues, which in small-town code usually meant addiction or mental illness. Ethan had no recorded connection to Lily beyond being a student at the same school. No romantic history. No conflicts. No reason to appear on any suspect list. And yet, Rena pulled up his class schedule, cross-referenced it with Lily's tutoring hours, found that Ethan was often in the library during the same periods, studying, he claimed, though his grade suggested he hardly needed to. She checked his social media. Carefully curated images of academic achievements, volunteer work, wholesome activities. Nothing suspicious. Nothing that would raise flags. But Rena knew that absence of evidence wasn't evidence of absence. Smart criminals didn't leave digital trails. Smart criminals crafted perfect alibis. Smart criminals performed grief so convincingly that grieving communities embraced them as fellow mourners. She needed more. She needed to dig deeper. She needed to find the crack in Ethan Mercer's perfect facade. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan Mercer sat at his desk, staring at Detective Castillo's business card. He should have been worried. The way she had looked at him. The questions she had asked. The intensity behind her professional composure. She suspected something. Maybe not consciously. Maybe just on an instinctual level that she couldn't yet articulate. But she had seen through the performance, or at least, she had noticed that it was a performance. That was dangerous. Ethan turned the card over in his fingers, considering his options. He could lie low. Avoid her. Let time and lack of evidence erode her suspicions. Or he could be proactive. Stay visible. Remain the grieving, cooperative community member that everyone already believed him to be. Make her suspicions seem paranoid, unfounded, the desperate grasping of a woman too emotionally involved in the case. He chose the latter. It was riskier, but it was also more elegant. And Ethan Mercer had never been able to resist elegance. He smiled, a genuine smile, free from performance, and placed the card in his desk drawer. Let her investigate. Let her dig. She would find nothing. Because there was nothing to find. He had made sure of it. But Ethan had made a mistake. Not in his forensic precautions. Not in his alibi construction. Not in any of the technical details he had so meticulously planned. His mistake was simpler. More human. He had underestimated the one person who knew him better than anyone. The one person who had seen behind the mask. The one person whose loyalty was finally beginning to crack under the weight of terrible knowledge. Marcus Webb was starting to remember. And those memories were becoming impossible to ignore. 3 weeks after Lily Castillo's murder, the investigation had officially stalled. Detective Cole and Detective Sharma had interviewed over 200 people, collected hundreds of hours of surveillance footage from businesses within a 5-mile radius, analyzed phone records, social media accounts, and financial transactions for dozens of potential suspects. They had found nothing. No viable leads. No credible suspects. No breakthrough evidence that could point them toward Lily's killer. The case was growing cold. Captain Webb held a press conference, appealing for public assistance. Anyone with information was urged to come forward. A reward fund, started by local businesses and swelling with community donations, had reached $50,000. Still nothing. The people of Crescent Ridge began to accept a terrible possibility, that Lily's killer might never be found. That justice might never be served. That the monster who had taken their sunshine might walk among them forever, unknown and unpunished. But Rena Castillo refused to accept it. And she wasn't the only one haunted by suspicions she couldn't prove. Marcus Webb hadn't slept properly in weeks. Every night, he lay in his narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, while fragments of memory churned through his exhausted mind. The bird with the broken wing. The planted evidence in Derek Holloway's backpack. Megan crying in the cafeteria. The venom in Ethan's voice when he talked about Lily's rejection. And the alibi. That damned alibi. I need you to say we were hanging out at your place. Studying for the chemistry test. Ethan's voice echoed in Marcus's skull like a curse. The request had seemed innocent enough at the time, helping a friend sneak out to meet a girl. Normal teenage stuff. Nothing to worry about. But that was before. Before Lily was found dead in the woods. Before Marcus started connecting dates and timelines in his head. Before the terrible truth began taking shape in the darkest corners of his mind. April 14th. The night Ethan had asked for an alibi. The night Lily Castillo was murdered. Coincidence? Marcus wanted desperately to believe it was coincidence. Wanted to believe that his best friend, his protector, his only real connection in the world, was incapable of something so monstrous. But the evidence kept accumulating. Ethan's obsession with Lily. His rage at her rejection. His sudden interest in forensic countermeasures, disguised as research for a creative writing project. The careful way he had extracted Marcus's cooperation without revealing any details. The way he performed grief at school, perfect, calculated, flawless in ways that real grief never was. Marcus knew Ethan better than anyone, and that knowledge was becoming unbearable. They still hung out. That was the surreal part. Life continued as if nothing had changed. Ethan still texted Marcus. Still sat with him at lunch. Still partnered with him on school projects. The rhythms of their friendship remained outwardly identical to what they had always been. But Marcus felt the difference. Every interaction was now poisoned by suspicion. Every smile Ethan offered seemed sinister. Every casual comment carried potential hidden meanings that Marcus analyzed for hours afterward. He started watching Ethan more carefully, observing the way his friend navigated social situations, cataloging the micro-expressions that flickered across his face before the mask settled into place, noting the moments when Ethan's eyes went cold and distant, as if he were observing the world from somewhere far away. The more Marcus watched, the more he saw. And the more he saw, the more terrified he became. The conversation happened on a Thursday afternoon. They were sitting in Ethan's car in the school parking lot, waiting out a spring rainstorm that had trapped everyone indoors. The sound of raindrops hammering the roof filled the silence between them. Marcus had been quiet all day, distracted, unable to meet Ethan's eyes. Ethan noticed. He always noticed. "You've been weird lately," Ethan said, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "What's going on?" "Nothing." Marcus's voice came out too quickly, too defensive. "Just stressed. School stuff. School stuff." Ethan repeated the words slowly, tasting them for falsehood. "You've been weird since before midterms. Since—" He paused meaningfully. "Since Lily." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. "Everyone's been weird since Lily," he managed. "It's not exactly something you just get over." "True." Ethan nodded, his expression sympathetic. "She was special. Her death affected the whole community. Her death. Not her murder. Not what happened to her. Her death. As if it were a natural event, an inevitable occurrence, something that simply happened rather than something that was done." Marcus's stomach churned. "Did you know her well?" he asked, keeping his voice carefully neutral. "You never really talked about her." Something flickered behind Ethan's eyes. Just for an instant. A flash of something cold and calculating, there and gone before Marcus could fully register it. "Not really," Ethan said smoothly. "She was a senior. Different social circle. But I admired her, you know. Everyone did." "You asked her out once." The words escaped before Marcus could stop them. Ethan's expression didn't change, but something in the air between them shifted. A subtle tension that hadn't been there before. "Who told you that?" "People talk." Marcus shrugged, trying to appear casual despite his racing heart. "Someone mentioned it. Said she turned you down." Silence. Rain hammering the roof. Ethan's pale blue eyes locked onto Marcus's face with an intensity that made his skin crawl. "She did," Ethan said finally. "It was no big deal. I asked, she declined, life moved on. That's how dating works." "Right. Of course." More silence. Marcus could feel Ethan studying him, analyzing his body language, reading the subtext beneath his words. He forced himself to breathe normally, to keep his hands still, to project the same desperate-to-please loyalty that had defined their friendship for a decade. But something had changed. They both knew it. The question was what Ethan would do about it. That night, Marcus dreamed of the sparrow. He was 13 again, standing in Ethan's backyard, watching his best friend hold the broken bird in his gloved hands. The tiny creature struggled frantically, its wings beating uselessly against Ethan's fingers. But in the dream, the bird had Lily's face. Her dark eyes looked up at Marcus, pleading silently for help. Her lips moved, forming words he couldn't hear. Her small body trembled with terror and pain. And Ethan's thumb pressed down. Slowly, inexorably, crushing the life out of her while his pale blue eyes watched with clinical fascination. Marcus woke up screaming. His mother rushed in, found him drenched in sweat and gasping for air, and held him while he sobbed. She asked what was wrong, what he had dreamed about, what was troubling him so deeply. He couldn't tell her. Couldn't find the words. Couldn't admit that his best friend, the boy who had protected him, defined him, given his lonely life meaning, might be a monster. So he lied. Said it was just stress. Said he was fine. Said he just needed some water and he'd go back to sleep. His mother accepted the lies. She was too exhausted from double shifts to push harder, and left him alone in the darkness. Marcus lay awake until dawn, thinking, remembering, finally, reluctantly, accepting what he had known for weeks. The next day, he started researching. Not forensics like Ethan had. Not how to commit crimes and avoid detection. Marcus researched how to report crimes anonymously. He found the website for the Crescent Ridge Police Department. Read about their tip line. Studied the process for submitting information without revealing his identity. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for hours. What would he even say? I think my best friend might have killed Lily Castillo. I don't have proof. I just have a feeling. And the fact that he asked me to be his alibi on the exact night she was murdered. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough for an official investigation. But maybe, it would be enough to point the police in the right direction. To make them look more closely at the golden boy everyone trusted. To find the evidence that Marcus knew must exist somewhere. Because Ethan was smart. But no one was perfect. Somewhere, somehow, he had made a mistake. He had to have made a mistake. Marcus typed the message. Deleted it. Typed it again. Deleted it again. The cursor blinked at him, patient and accusatory. What if he was wrong? What if Ethan really had been meeting a girl that night? What if Marcus destroyed his best friend's life based on nothing but paranoid suspicions and disturbing dreams? The guilt would be unbearable. But then Marcus thought of Lily. Her kind smile. Her warm eyes. The way she made everyone feel seen and valued. She had been sunshine made human, and now she was gone, and no one knew who had taken her. Except maybe Marcus. Maybe Marcus knew. And if he stayed silent, if he protected Ethan out of loyalty and fear and the desperate need to preserve their friendship, then he was complicit. He was an accessory. He was choosing his own comfort over justice for a girl who had never done anything but try to help people. Lily deserved better than his silence. Her family deserved better. The whole community deserved better. Marcus typed the message one final time. Look into Ethan Mercer. Sophomore at Crescent Ridge High School. He asked me to be his alibi for the night Lily was killed. I think he might be involved. He didn't sign it. Didn't provide any identifying information. Just hit send and closed the browser with trembling hands. It wasn't much. But it was something. A tiny crack in the wall of silence he had built around his suspicions. And cracks, once started, have a way of spreading. Detective Rena Castillo received the anonymous tip at 2:47 a.m. She wasn't supposed to be checking case files. Wasn't supposed to have access to the tip line. Wasn't supposed to be doing anything except grieving and letting the official investigators do their jobs. But she had never been good at following rules when justice was at stake. She read the message 3 times. Ethan Mercer. The name that had been circling in her mind for weeks. The boy with the perfect performance and the cold eyes. The sophomore who had no obvious connection to Lily but kept appearing at the edges of Rena's awareness. Someone else had noticed. Someone who knew him well enough to know about an alibi request. Someone close to him. Rena's heart pounded as she considered the implications. The tip wasn't evidence. It wasn't probable cause. It wasn't anything that could justify an official investigation or a search warrant. But it was confirmation. Confirmation that her instincts weren't crazy. That Ethan Mercer was worth looking at more closely. That somewhere beneath that polished exterior, there might be something worth finding. She needed more information. She needed to know everything about this boy, his history, his psychology, his secrets. She needed to understand what made him tick, what drove him, what might have motivated him to target Lily. And she needed to do it carefully. Because if Ethan Mercer was what she suspected he was, then he was watching, calculating, preparing countermoves for any threat that emerged. One wrong step, and he would disappear into his mask forever. One wrong step, and Lily's killer would walk free. Rena closed her laptop and stared into the darkness of her apartment. The game had changed. She had a name now. A target. a direction, and she would follow it wherever it led, no matter the cost. Across town, Ethan Mercer sat at his desk, scrolling through his encrypted browser history. He wasn't worried exactly, but he was aware. Marcus had been acting strangely, asking questions he shouldn't be asking, looking at Ethan with an expression that suggested uncomfortable thoughts were forming behind those anxious eyes. The alibi had been a calculated risk. Ethan had needed verification of his whereabouts, and Marcus was the obvious choice. Loyal, dependent, desperate to please. The story about the secret girlfriend had been simple enough to sell, and Marcus had accepted it without question. But that was before. Before Lily's body was discovered. Before the investigation began. Before Marcus had time to think, to remember, to connect dots that should never have been connected. Ethan had underestimated him. That was annoying. Marcus had always been so predictable, so easily managed, so thoroughly under Ethan's control that the possibility of independent thought had never seemed like a serious concern. But people changed. Guilt did strange things to weak minds. And Marcus Webb, for all his flaws, had never been completely without conscience. Ethan considered his options. He could confront Marcus directly, remind him of their friendship, leverage the psychological dependency he had cultivated for a decade. Or he could take more drastic measures, remove the threat permanently, make sure Marcus never had the opportunity to share his suspicions with anyone who mattered. The second option was cleaner, more final, less dependent on Marcus's continued cooperation. But it was also riskier. 2 deaths in the same social circle would raise flags, draw attention, potentially expose patterns that the police hadn't noticed with a single victim. No. Better to manage Marcus than eliminate him. For now. Ethan closed his browser and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. The situation was manageable. Marcus might suspect, but suspicion wasn't evidence. And as long as there was no evidence, Ethan was untouchable. He just needed to remind Marcus of that fact. Firmly. Personally. Tomorrow. Marcus Webb was drowning. Not literally, though some nights, gasping for air in the darkness of his bedroom, it felt close enough. No, Marcus was drowning in something worse than water. He was drowning in knowledge. In guilt. In the suffocating weight of a secret that grew heavier with every passing hour. 3 days had passed since he sent the anonymous tip. 3 days of waiting for something to happen. 3 days of jumping every time his phone buzzed, every time a police car drove past, every time someone looked at him for a second too long. Nothing happened. The investigation continued its slow, frustrating stall. Detective Cole appeared on the local news, appealing again for information. The reward fund climbed past $60,000. Vigils were held. Prayers were offered. And Lily's killer remained free, walking the halls of Crescent Ridge High School, sitting 3 seats away in chemistry class, texting Marcus casual questions about homework assignments as if nothing in the world was wrong. The normalcy was unbearable. Marcus started avoiding Ethan. It wasn't conscious at first. Just small adjustments to his routine. Taking different routes between classes. Eating lunch in the library instead of the cafeteria. Claiming headaches and stomachaches to skip the hangout sessions that had defined their friendship for a decade. He told himself it was temporary. Just until he figured out what to do. Just until the police followed up on his tip and started asking questions. Just until someone else took the burden of knowing off his shoulders. But the days passed, and nothing changed, and Marcus's isolation deepened. His mother noticed. "You've barely eaten this week," Diane Webb said one evening, studying her son across their small kitchen table. "And you look like you haven't slept in days. What's going on?" "Nothing." The word came out flat, rehearsed. "Just stressed about finals." "Finals are 2 months away." "I like to prepare early." Diane's eyes narrowed. She had raised 2 children mostly alone, working double shifts while navigating the chaos of single parenthood. She knew when her kids were lying. "Marcus." Her voice softened. "Whatever it is, you can tell me. You know that, right?" Whatever's bothering you, I'm here. I'll always be here. For a moment, just a moment, Marcus almost broke. The words crowded in his throat, desperate to escape. I think my best friend killed someone. I think I helped him get away with it. I don't know what to do. But he couldn't. Couldn't drag his mother into this nightmare. Couldn't burden her with knowledge that might put her in danger. Couldn't watch her face transform from concern to horror as she realized what her son had become, an accessory to murder, a coward who had stayed silent for weeks while a killer walked free. I'm fine, Mom, he said. Really? Just tired. Diane held his gaze for a long moment, searching for the truth he was hiding. Then she sighed, reached across the table, and squeezed his hand. I love you, she said. Whatever happens. Remember that. Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. He excused himself, retreated to his room, and lay on his bed staring at the ceiling until exhaustion finally dragged him into fitful sleep. The nightmares were getting worse. Every night, the same images cycled through his unconscious mind. The sparrow crushed in Ethan's hands. Lily's face replacing the bird's, her eyes pleading for help that never came. The woods behind the school, fog-shrouded and ominous, where something terrible waited in the darkness. And always, always, Ethan's pale blue eyes. Watching. Calculating. Knowing exactly what Marcus suspected and finding it amusing. You can't escape me, those eyes seemed to say. You belong to me. You've always belonged to me. And you always will. Marcus woke from these dreams gasping, drenched in sweat, his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his teeth. He was falling apart. He knew it. And he didn't know how to stop it. Detective Rena Castillo had received the anonymous tip. But tips without evidence were just starting points, directions to investigate, not conclusions to act upon. She needed more. She needed something concrete. Something that would justify official scrutiny of Ethan Mercer without revealing that she was still working the case. She started with his digital footprint. Or rather, the absence of one. Most teenagers left traces everywhere. Social media posts, search histories, location data from apps that tracked their movements without their knowledge. But Ethan's online presence was remarkably curated. His public profiles showed nothing but academic achievements and community service. His tagged photos depicted a wholesome, well-adjusted young man with a bright future. Too perfect. Too clean. Too carefully managed. Rena knew that genuine innocence was messy. Real teenagers made mistakes, posted embarrassing content, left digital breadcrumbs that revealed their true selves. The absence of any such content wasn't evidence of a well-behaved kid. It was evidence of someone who understood surveillance and deliberately managed their footprint. She dug deeper. Property records showed that Richard Mercer had purchased a laptop for his son 8 months ago, a high-end model with encryption capabilities far beyond what any normal teenager would need. Credit card statements, obtained through channels Rena chose not to examine too closely, revealed purchases at electronic stores in neighboring counties. VPN subscriptions. Privacy software. Tools that would make tracking online activity virtually impossible. Why would a 15-year-old honor student need military-grade digital privacy? What was he hiding? The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Rena had been interviewing Lily's tutoring students, the freshmen she had helped at the library every Wednesday evening. Most of them were too grief-stricken to offer useful information. But one of them, a nervous boy named Kevin Park, mentioned something that made Rena's ears perk up. There was this other kid, Kevin said, fidgeting with his backpack straps. He wasn't part of our group, but he was always there. In the library, I mean. Whenever Lily was tutoring us. What did he look like? Dark hair. Really? I don't know, intense? He sat in the corner with his laptop, but he wasn't really studying. He was watching. I remember because it creeped me out a little. Like he was more interested in Lily than in his homework. Did you ever see him talk to her? Kevin shrugged. Maybe. I don't remember. But he was there every week. Same table. Same corner. Just watching. Rena felt her pulse quicken. Would you recognize him if you saw him again? Kevin nodded slowly. Rena pulled up the Crescent Ridge High School yearbook on her phone, scrolled through the sophomore class photos, stopped on a familiar face. "That's him," Kevin said immediately. "That's the guy. Ethan Mercer. Watching Lily. Every Wednesday. 4 weeks before her murder." It still wasn't proof, but it was a pattern. And patterns, once identified, could be followed. Rena brought her findings to Detective Cole. She framed it carefully, a concerned aunt sharing observations, not an off-duty cop interfering with an active investigation. Cole listened with professional patience, taking notes, asking clarifying questions. "The anonymous tip mentioned him specifically," Rena said. "Someone close to Mercer knows something. And now we have a witness who places him watching the victim repeatedly in the weeks before her death." Cole nodded slowly. "It's suggestive. But it's not enough for a warrant. Watching someone in a public place isn't a crime." "What about his internet history? The encryption software, the privacy tools?" "Also not crimes." Cole's voice was sympathetic but firm. "Look, Rena, I understand your frustration. If this kid is dirty, I want to nail him as much as you do. But we need something concrete. Physical evidence. Witness testimony. Something that connects him directly to the murder." "What about the alibi mentioned in the tip?" "Anonymous tips aren't testimony. We can't act on them without corroboration." Cole leaned forward, his expression serious. "If you're right, if Mercer is our guy, then whoever sent that tip knows more than they're saying. We need that person to come forward. Officially. On the record." Rena's jaw tightened. She knew Cole was right. The legal system required evidence, not intuition. Courtrooms demanded proof, not patterns. Everything she had gathered pointed toward Ethan Mercer, but pointing wasn't the same as proving. She needed the anonymous tipster to step forward. She needed whoever knew about the alibi to find the courage to speak. She needed Marcus Webb, though she didn't yet know his name, to stop hiding and start talking. But Marcus was paralyzed. The anonymous tip had felt like action at the time. A step toward justice. A way to share the burden without fully exposing himself. But nothing had happened. And now Marcus was caught between two impossible options. He could go to the police directly. Tell them everything he knew, the alibi request, the obsession with Lily, the patterns of behavior he had witnessed over the years. Become a witness. Testify against his best friend. And in doing so, destroy his own life. Because Marcus had provided an alibi for a murderer. Had told his mother, and by extension anyone who asked, that he and Ethan had been studying together the night Lily died. He was complicit. Entangled. A potential accessory after the fact whose testimony would be immediately challenged by defense attorneys looking for any weakness to exploit. "Why didn't you come forward sooner? What else are you hiding? How can the jury trust someone who lied to protect a killer for weeks?" The questions haunted him. Even if he found the courage to speak, even if the police believed him, even if Ethan was arrested and charged, Marcus's life would never be the same. His friendship with Ethan would be over. His reputation would be destroyed. His mother would learn that her son had helped cover up a murder. And Ethan would know exactly who had betrayed him. Would have years, decades, maybe, to plan revenge. The thought made Marcus physically ill. The alternative was equally unbearable. He could stay silent, bury his suspicions, pretend that the alibi was innocent, that Ethan was innocent, that the whole terrible situation was just paranoid fantasy. He could go back to being the loyal shadow, the grateful follower, the boy whose entire identity was defined by his friendship with the golden boy of Crescent Ridge. But he would know. Every time he looked at Ethan, he would see Lily's face. Every time they laughed together, he would hear her screams echoing in his imagination. Every time Ethan smiled that charming, disarming smile, Marcus would wonder who else might eventually draw his attention. Who else might reject him? Who else might need to be taught a lesson? Living with that knowledge, protecting someone capable of murder, would destroy Marcus from the inside out. It was already destroying him. The weight of silence was crushing him slowly, inexorably, grinding him down into something unrecognizable. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on school or family or anything except the endless loop of horror playing in his mind. Something had to give. Something had to break. And soon it would. The tipping point came on a Tuesday afternoon. Marcus was in the library, his new sanctuary, far from the cafeteria where Ethan held court, when he saw them. Detective Castillo and a uniformed officer, walking through the main hallway, speaking with the principal. They weren't there about Lily. Or rather, they weren't there officially about Lily. The principal was nodding, gesturing toward various parts of the building, playing tour guide for visitors whose presence seemed routine. But Marcus saw the way Detective Castillo's eyes scanned the crowd. Searching, analyzing, looking for something or someone that the official visit didn't explain. And then her gaze found him. For just a moment, their eyes met. Marcus felt the weight of that stare like a physical force. She didn't know who he was. Couldn't know that he was the anonymous tipster, the terrified boy hiding secrets that could blow the case wide open. But something in her expression suggested recognition. Not of his face, of his fear. She had the eyes of someone who had seen 1,000 guilty consciences, 1,000 people carrying burdens too heavy to bear. She knew the look, recognized the symptoms. And for one electric instant, Marcus felt certain that she was looking directly into his soul. Then she moved on, continuing her conversation with the principal, and the moment passed. But the impact remained. That night, Marcus sat alone in his room, holding his phone. The detective's card was easy enough to find. Rena Castillo, Crescent Ridge Police Department. The same information that was printed on the tip line website. He could call her, tell her everything, end this nightmare once and for all. His thumb hovered over the dial button. One press. That's all it would take. One moment of courage. But the moment stretched on, and on. And Marcus set the phone down, hands trembling, courage failing. Not yet. He wasn't ready yet. But soon. Soon he would have to choose. The weight of silence was becoming too heavy to carry. And one way or another, it was going to crush him. Ethan Mercer had always been able to read people. It was his gift, perhaps his only genuine one. While other children learned to ride bikes and throw baseballs, Ethan had studied the subtle language of human behavior. The micro-expressions that flickered across faces before conscious control could mask them. The body language that betrayed what words tried to hide. The invisible threads of desire and fear that connected every person to their deepest vulnerabilities. He had used this gift his entire life. To charm teachers. To manipulate classmates. To construct the perfect persona that made everyone trust him, admire him, never suspect the emptiness behind his pale blue eyes. And now, that same gift was telling him something troubling. Marcus Webb was slipping away. The signs had been accumulating for weeks. The avoided eye contact. The sudden schedule changes that kept them apart. The stilted conversations that replaced their easy banter. The way Marcus flinched, actually flinched, when Ethan touched his shoulder in the hallway. Something had changed. Something had broken in the fragile architecture of Marcus's loyalty. Ethan had considered various explanations. Stress. Depression. The general trauma of Lily's death affecting everyone at school. Marcus had always been emotionally fragile, easily destabilized by external events. But this felt different. This felt specific. This felt like suspicion. Ethan spent 3 days observing Marcus with the same clinical precision he had once applied to Lily. He noted the new patterns. Marcus eating lunch alone in the library. Marcus taking circuitous routes between classes. Marcus checking his phone constantly, as if waiting for a message that never came, or dreading one that might. He noted the physical deterioration. The dark circles under Marcus's eyes. The weight loss visible in his increasingly gaunt cheeks. The tremor in his hands that suggested chronic anxiety or sleep deprivation. And he noted the guilt. That was the key. Marcus Webb radiated guilt like a fever patient radiated heat. It was visible in every aspect of his bearing. The hunched shoulders, the downcast eyes, the way he seemed to be constantly apologizing for his own existence. Ethan had seen that posture before. On witnesses about to crack. On accomplices whose consciences had grown too heavy to carry. On people who were one step away from doing something very, very stupid. The conclusion was obvious. Marcus suspected something. Maybe not the full truth. He wasn't smart enough to piece together the complete picture, but enough. Enough to make him dangerous. Enough to potentially unravel everything Ethan had so carefully constructed. The situation required management. Immediately. Ethan chose his moment carefully. Friday afternoon. The school week ending. Students flooding toward exits, eager for weekend freedom. The chaos of departure providing perfect cover for a private conversation. He found Marcus at his locker, shoving books into a worn backpack with the mechanical movements of someone operating on autopilot. "Hey!" Marcus jumped. Actually jumped, a full-body startle response that confirmed every suspicion Ethan had developed over the past weeks. "Jesus, Ethan." Marcus pressed a hand to his chest. "You scared me." "Sorry." Ethan smiled, warm, apologetic, completely genuine in appearance. "Didn't mean to sneak up on you. You've been hard to find lately." "Yeah, I've been busy. Stuff with my mom. Family things." The lie was transparent. Marcus had never been a good liar. His eyes darted sideways. His voice pitched slightly higher. His hand continued pressing against his chest as if trying to slow his racing heart. "We should hang out," Ethan said, keeping his tone casual. "It feels like forever since we actually talked. There's this thing I want to show you. Got a new setup in my room, gaming rig, surround sound, the whole deal. We could order pizza, play some games, catch up." "I don't know, man. I've got a lot of homework." "Marcus." Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We need to talk. Really talk. Something's been off between us, and I want to fix it. You're my best friend. My only real friend, honestly. Whatever's going on, we can work through it." The words were perfectly calibrated. Vulnerability. Emotional appeal. Reinforcement of their bond. Every weapon in Ethan's psychological arsenal, deployed with surgical precision. Marcus's resistance wavered. Ethan could see it. The desperate need for connection warring with the fear that had been driving his avoidance. Marcus had spent his entire life craving acceptance, and Ethan had spent a decade providing it. That dependency didn't disappear overnight, no matter what suspicions might be germinating in Marcus's troubled mind. "Okay," Marcus said finally. "Yeah, okay. We can hang out." "Great." Ethan clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture of friendship, of normalcy, of everything Marcus wanted their relationship to be. "My place. 1 hour. It'll be like old times." He walked away before Marcus could change his mind. Behind him, Marcus stood frozen at his locker, backpack hanging limply from one hand, looking like a man who had just agreed to his own execution. The Mercer house was empty. Richard was in New York, closing a deal that would keep him away for another week. Patricia had retreated to her bedroom at 3 in the afternoon, sedated into oblivion by her afternoon cocktail of pills. Perfect conditions. No witnesses. No interruptions. No constraints on how the conversation might unfold. Ethan prepared carefully. Ordered pizza from Marcus's favorite place. Set up the gaming consoles that would provide pretense for the evening. Arranged the living room to feel comfortable, inviting, safe. Then he waited. Marcus arrived at 5:47 p.m. He stood on the doorstep for a long moment before ringing the bell, visibly gathering his courage. When Ethan opened the door, Marcus's face was a mask of forced normalcy that fooled no one. "Hey, come in." Ethan stepped aside, gesturing toward the living room. "Pizza's on the way. You want a drink?" "My mom's got like 15 different kinds of soda in the garage fridge." "Water's fine." "Sure. Make yourself comfortable." Marcus sat on the edge of the leather couch, perched like a bird ready to flee at the first sign of danger. His eyes darted around the room, cataloging exits, measuring distances. The posture of a prey animal in predator territory. Ethan returned with 2 bottles of water, settled into the armchair across from Marcus, and let the silence stretch. Sometimes silence was the most powerful weapon. It forced people to fill the void, to speak when they should stay quiet, to reveal things they intended to hide. Marcus lasted approximately 45 seconds. So what did you want to talk about? Us. Ethan's voice was calm, measured. Our friendship. The fact that you've been avoiding me for weeks. I haven't been. Marcus. The single word carried just enough edge to stop the denial. Don't. I know you. I've known you since we were 5 years old. Something's wrong, and I need you to tell me what it is. Marcus's hands twisted together in his lap. It's nothing. Really. I've just been stressed. School stuff. My mom's been working extra shifts, so I've been helping more at home. It's not about you. Isn't it? Silence. Marcus's eyes dropped to the floor. Because from where I'm sitting, Ethan continued, his tone shifting toward something softer, more understanding, it feels like you're scared of me. And I don't understand why. We've been best friends for 10 years. We've been through everything together. So if something's bothering you, if I did something wrong, I need to know. The performance was flawless. Vulnerable concern. Emotional openness. The kind of authentic communication that Marcus had always craved from their friendship but rarely received. And it worked. Marcus's resistance crumbled. It's about Lily, he whispered. The name hung in the air between them. Ethan kept his expression carefully neutral, projecting only gentle concern. What about Lily? The night she... Marcus swallowed hard. The night she died. That was April 14th. A Wednesday. Okay. That was the same night you asked me to cover for you. The alibi. For your date with that girl from Lincoln High. Ethan said nothing. I didn't think about it at first, Marcus continued, the words coming faster now, tumbling over each other like they'd been damned too long. I was just doing what you asked. Being a good friend. But then the news came out, and the investigation started, and I kept thinking about the timing. The exact same night. The exact same hours. Marcus. And then I remembered other things. Marcus's voice cracked. The way you watched her. In the library, when she was tutoring those kids. Every Wednesday, like clockwork. The way you talked about her after she turned you down. So angry, so cold. The things you said about her deserving to learn a lesson. His eyes finally rose to meet Ethan's. They were filled with tears. And terror. Please tell me I'm wrong, Marcus begged. Please tell me there's an explanation. Please tell me my best friend isn't. He couldn't finish the sentence. Ethan let the moment stretch. He could deny everything. Gaslight Marcus into doubting his own memories. Construct an elaborate explanation that would satisfy the desperate need to believe that his friend was innocent. But looking at Marcus now, trembling, broken, clinging to the last threads of denial, Ethan realized something. It was too late for that. Marcus knew. Maybe not with courtroom certainty, but with the bone-deep conviction that came from truly understanding someone. The same understanding that Ethan had cultivated for a decade was now working against him. Denial wouldn't work. So Ethan chose a different approach. You're not wrong. Marcus stopped breathing. The words hit him like a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs. What? You're not wrong, Ethan repeated calmly. About any of it. The watching. The alibi. The timing. He leaned forward slightly, his pale blue eyes locked onto Marcus's face with an intensity that bordered on hypnotic. Lily rejected me. Saw through me in a way no one else ever had. And I couldn't let that stand. So I planned. I prepared. I executed. And I asked you to cover for me because I knew you would. Because you always do what I ask. Because you need me more than you need your own conscience. Marcus was shaking. His whole body trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. Why? His voice was barely audible. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I need you to understand something." Ethan's tone was patient, almost gentle, the voice of a teacher explaining a simple concept to a struggling student. "You're involved now. You provided an alibi for a murder. You've kept silent for weeks while the police searched for a killer you could have identified. You're not a witness, Marcus. You're an accomplice." The color drained from Marcus's face. "If you go to the police," Ethan continued, "they won't just arrest me. They'll arrest you too. Obstruction of justice. Accessory after the fact. Your mother will watch her son be led away in handcuffs. Your sister will grow up visiting her brother in prison. Everything you've built, everything you've survived, it all ends." Tears streamed down Marcus's cheeks. "But if you stay quiet," Ethan said, his voice dropping to something almost conspiratorial, "none of that happens. We go back to normal. Best friends. Brothers. The way it's always been. The way it was always supposed to be." He reached out and placed a hand on Marcus's knee. The touch was gentle, almost tender, absolutely terrifying. "I know this is a lot to process," Ethan said. "Take some time. Think it through. But remember, you're not my victim, Marcus. You're my partner. We're in this together. And as long as we stick together, no one can touch us." He smiled. That warm, charming, utterly false smile that had fooled everyone for 15 years. "Now, pizza should be here soon. You want to play some games while we wait?" Marcus didn't remember leaving. He didn't remember walking to the door, or stepping outside, or making his way down the perfectly manicured driveway. His body operated on autopilot while his mind screamed in endless, silent horror. Ethan had confessed. Actually confessed. And then threatened him with such casual certainty that the message was unmistakable. "Stay silent, or I destroy you. Stay loyal, or I take everything you love. You belong to me. You've always belonged to me. And now there's no escape." Marcus walked. He didn't know where. Didn't care. Just needed to move, to breathe, to process the apocalypse that had just detonated in the center of his world. He thought of Lily. Her kind smile. Her warm eyes. The way she made everyone feel seen and valued. He thought of her family. Her parents, still drowning in grief. Her sister, too young to understand. Her aunt, the detective who was working so hard to find justice. He thought of himself. The scared, broken boy who had attached himself to a monster and never found the courage to let go. And somewhere in the chaos of his thoughts, something shifted. Something hardened. The fear was still there, overwhelming, paralyzing, all-consuming. But beneath it, something else was growing. Something that felt almost like resolve. Ethan thought Marcus was weak. Thought he could be controlled forever. Thought the desperate, needy boy who had followed him since kindergarten would never find the strength to walk away. Maybe he was right. But maybe, just maybe, he was wrong. Marcus stopped walking. He was standing in front of the Crescent Ridge Police Department. He didn't remember deciding to come here. But here he was. The building loomed before him, solid and institutional, promising both salvation and destruction in equal measure. Detective Castillo was somewhere inside. Waiting. Searching. Desperate for the break that could bring Lily's killer to justice. Marcus's hand found the door handle. He stood there for a long moment, trembling, terrified, balanced on the knife's edge between the person he had been and the person he might become. Then he pulled the door open and walked inside. The Crescent Ridge Police Department was quiet at 7:23 p.m. Most of the day shift had gone home. The skeleton crew manning the evening hours moved through their routines with the unhurried efficiency of people who expected nothing remarkable to happen. They were wrong. Marcus Webb stood in the lobby, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his fingertips. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, clinical glow that made the world feel slightly unreal. This was it. The point of no return. The moment that would divide his life into before and after. A desk sergeant looked up from her computer, eyebrows raised in mild curiosity. "Can I help you, son?" Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. The words wouldn't come. They were lodged somewhere in his chest, trapped behind a decade of loyalty and fear and desperate need for belonging. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around, to walk out, to go back to Ethan and beg forgiveness for even considering this betrayal. But then he saw it. A photograph on the bulletin board behind the desk. Lily Castillo, smiling in her senior portrait, beneath the word missing that had been crossed out and replaced with homicide victim. Her eyes seemed to look directly at him. "Tell them," those eyes seemed to say. "Tell them what you know. Give me justice. Give my family peace. Be brave, just this once." "I need to speak with Detective Castillo," Marcus heard himself say. "It's about the Lily Castillo case. I have information." Detective Rena Castillo had been about to leave for the night. 11 weeks of investigating her niece's murder had taken a brutal toll. She had lost weight, lost sleep, lost something essential in herself that she wasn't sure she'd ever recover. Every day without answers was another day of failure, another day of watching her brother's family disintegrate under the weight of unresolved grief. When the desk sergeant called her extension, she almost didn't answer. "There's a kid here," Sergeant Morrison said. "Teenager. Says he has information about the Castillo case. Looks scared out of his mind, but he's asking for you specifically." Rena's exhaustion evaporated. "I'm on my way." Marcus sat in interview room 2, staring at his hands. They were still trembling. Probably wouldn't stop trembling for a long time. The room was small and sparse, a metal table, 3 chairs, a camera mounted in the corner that recorded everything. The walls were painted institutional beige. The air smelled like old coffee and cleaning solution. Marcus had seen enough crime shows to know what happened in rooms like this. Confessions. Interrogations. Lives changing forever. The door opened. Detective Rena Castillo stepped inside, and Marcus felt the full weight of what he was about to do crash over him. This was Lily's aunt. The woman who had been fighting for justice while Marcus stayed silent. The person whose grief he had prolonged with every day of cowardice. She looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes. Lines of tension around her mouth. The kind of bone-deep weariness that no amount of sleep could cure. But her eyes were sharp. Focused. Hungry for answers. "I'm Detective Castillo," she said, settling into the chair across from him. "The sergeant said you have information about my niece's case." Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. "Before we start, I need to tell you a few things." Rena's tone was professional but not unkind. "This conversation is being recorded. You have the right to have a parent or guardian present, and you have the right to legal counsel. Given what you might be about to share, I'd recommend." "I don't want to wait." The words came out stronger than Marcus expected. "If I wait, I'll lose my nerve," he continued. "I'll talk myself out of it. I'll go home and pretend this never happened and spend the rest of my life hating myself for being a coward." His voice cracked. "I need to do this now. Please." Rena studied him for a long moment. Whatever she saw in his face, the terror, the guilt, the desperate determination, seemed to satisfy her. "Okay," she said softly. "In your own time. Tell me what you know." Marcus told her everything. He started at the beginning. Really the beginning. Kindergarten. The playground. Ethan appearing like a guardian angel to chase away bullies and claim Marcus's loyalty forever. He talked about the years of friendship. The gradual realization that something was different about Ethan. The small cruelties he had witnessed and ignored. The bird with the broken wing. The planted evidence. The girl humiliated into transferring schools. He talked about Lily. Ethan's obsession. The watching. The rejection that had transformed fascination into something darker. The venom in Ethan's voice when he spoke about her deserving to be taught a lesson. He talked about the alibi request. The story about the secret girlfriend. The specific date, April 14th. The same night Lily was murdered. The convenience that Marcus had tried so hard to dismiss as coincidence. And finally, Trembling so hard he could barely form words, he talked about the confrontation. "He confessed," Marcus whispered. "Today. At his house. He told me everything. Said I was an accomplice now. Said if I went to the police, I'd be arrested too. Said we were partners." Tears streamed down his cheeks. "He killed her. Ethan killed Lily. And I helped him get away with it because I was too scared and too stupid and too desperate for his approval to see what he really was." His voice broke completely. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know it doesn't mean anything. I know sorry doesn't bring her back. But I'm sorry." He buried his face in his hands and sobbed. Rena sat in silence for a long moment. 11 weeks. 11 weeks of dead ends and false leads and mounting despair. And now, finally, answers. She should have felt triumphant. Vindicated. The instincts she had trusted from the beginning were confirmed. Ethan Mercer was exactly the monster she had suspected him to be. But watching Marcus Webb break down across the table, she felt something else entirely. Sorrow. This boy had been manipulated since childhood, groomed into dependency by a predator who understood exactly which psychological buttons to push. He had been weak and foolish and complicit in ways that would haunt him forever. But he had also found the courage to walk through those doors. To speak the truth when silence would have been so much easier. To betray the only person who had ever made him feel like he belonged. That took something. Something that many people never found in themselves. "Marcus." Rena's voice was gentle. "Look at me." He raised his tear-streaked face, expecting condemnation. "What you did, staying silent for 11 weeks, was wrong. There's no getting around that. You're going to have to face consequences. Legal consequences. Personal consequences. This is going to be hard." Marcus nodded miserably. "But you came forward." Rena leaned across the table, her eyes holding his. "You walked in here knowing what it would cost you, and you told the truth anyway. That matters. To me. To my family. To Lily." A fresh wave of tears spilled down Marcus's cheeks. "The confession Ethan made to you, did anyone else hear it?" Marcus shook his head. "We were alone. His parents weren't home." "Did he threaten you?" "Explicitly. He said if I went to the police, I'd be arrested too. That we were accomplices. Partners." Marcus's voice shook. "He said everything I'd built would end." Rena nodded slowly, her mind already racing through the implications. A verbal confession with no witnesses or recordings was problematic. Defense attorneys would challenge it immediately. It was Marcus's word against Ethan's, and Ethan had 15 years of careful reputation building to support his denials. They needed more. Physical evidence. Digital evidence. Something that could corroborate Marcus's testimony and remove all reasonable doubt. "I need you to think carefully," Rena said. "Did Ethan ever talk about his preparations? His research? Anything that might exist in physical form, notes, files, internet history?" Marcus frowned, reaching back through months of memory. He was always on his laptop. Never let anyone touch it. He bought a bunch of encryption software. I remember him bragging about how no one could ever access his files. Marcus paused. But there was something else. Before Lily, he used to joke about this notebook he kept. Called it his observation journal. He said it was for creative writing, but what? But I saw it once. Accidentally. It had pages and pages about people. Detailed notes about their habits, their schedules, their weaknesses. Marcus's voice dropped. I saw Lily's name in it. And a lot of other stuff I didn't understand at the time. Rena's pulse quickened. A notebook. Physical evidence. Something that even the best encryption couldn't hide. Do you know where he keeps it? His desk. In his room. There's a false bottom in one of the drawers. Marcus looked up, something like hope flickering in his devastated eyes. He thinks no one knows about it. But I found it by accident years ago. He doesn't know I know. The next 3 hours were a whirlwind of activity. Detective Cole was called back to the station. Captain Webb was briefed. Prosecutors were consulted. The legal machinery that had been grinding in frustration for 11 weeks suddenly found traction. Marcus's testimony, combined with the potential physical evidence in Ethan's room, was enough for a warrant. Not just for the notebook. For Ethan's laptop, his phone, his entire bedroom. For everything. The warrant was signed at 11:47 p.m. Execution was scheduled for 6 a.m. the following morning, early enough to catch Ethan at home, late enough to assemble the necessary personnel without arousing suspicion. Marcus spent the night at the station. Not under arrest, not yet, but under protective supervision. His mother was called, arrived in a state of bewildered terror, and held her son while he explained everything he had done and everything he had hidden. Diane Webb cried. She cried for Lily Castillo, whom she had never met. She cried for her son, who had carried this burden alone for so long. She cried for herself, for the guilt of not seeing the signs, for the years she had let Ethan Mercer influence her vulnerable boy. But she didn't let go. Didn't pull away. Didn't abandon Marcus the way he had always feared she would. "We'll get through this," she whispered, stroking his hair. "Together. Whatever happens. We'll get through it together." For the first time in 11 weeks, Marcus believed her. At 6 a.m. on March 8, 2020, a convoy of police vehicles pulled up to the Mercer residence on Willowbrook Lane. Detective Cole led the team. Rena Castillo was there too, officially as an observer, unofficially as the one person who had never stopped believing this moment would come. They knocked on the door. Richard Mercer answered, still in his bathrobe, confusion giving way to outrage as the warrant was presented. "This is absurd," he sputtered. "My son is an honor student. A community leader. Whatever lies you've been told." "Sir, we have a warrant," Detective Cole said firmly. "Please step aside." They found Ethan in his bedroom. He was already awake, already dressed, already sitting at his desk with his hands folded neatly in front of him, as if he had been expecting this moment all along. His pale blue eyes tracked the officers as they entered, cataloging faces, analyzing body language, calculating options. "Ethan Mercer," Detective Cole said, "you're under arrest for the murder of Lily Castillo. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." Ethan listened to the Miranda rights without expression. When they were finished, he spoke. "I want my lawyer." They led him out in handcuffs, past his bewildered father, past his sedated mother, who had emerged from her bedroom and now stood in the hallway, blinking in confusion at the chaos engulfing her home, past the neighbors who had gathered on the sidewalk, drawn by the flashing lights and the unthinkable spectacle of the golden boy being led away like a common criminal. Ethan's face remained perfectly composed, but as he was guided into the back of the police cruiser, his eyes found the one observer who stood apart from the others. Rena Castillo, Lily's aunt, the woman who had never stopped hunting him. Their gazes locked for just a moment. And in that moment, Ethan's mask slipped. Just slightly. Just enough to reveal the cold, reptilian fury beneath. "This isn't over," those eyes seemed to say. "You haven't won. Not yet." Then the door closed, and the cruiser pulled away, and Ethan Mercer disappeared from Willowbrook Lane forever. They found the notebook exactly where Marcus said it would be. 47 pages of meticulous observations. Detailed profiles of dozens of people, classmates, teachers, neighbors. Notes on their habits, their weaknesses, their exploitable vulnerabilities. And at the center of it all, Lily Castillo. Pages and pages devoted to her. Her schedule. Her routines. Her psychology. Her rejection of Ethan, analyzed and reanalyzed with obsessive fury. And finally, the plan. Step by step. Contingency by contingency. The creation of Tyler Morrison. The lure to the clearing. The timeline. The forensic countermeasures. Everything. Written in Ethan's own handwriting. Undeniable. Irrefutable. Damning. Rena Castillo stood outside the Mercer house as the evidence was catalogued and the crime scene tape went up. She pulled out her phone. Dialed her brother's number. Miguel answered on the first ring, his voice heavy with the exhaustion of a man who had stopped sleeping months ago. "Rena? What is it? What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," she said, and her voice cracked on the words. "Miguel, we got him. We arrested the boy who killed Lily. We have evidence. We have a confession. It's over." Silence on the other end. Then a sound she hadn't heard in 11 weeks. Her brother crying. Not the quiet, controlled tears of a man trying to stay strong for his family. Real tears. The kind that came from somewhere so deep they couldn't be stopped. "Thank you," Miguel whispered. "Thank you, Rena. Thank you." Rena closed her eyes, letting her own tears fall. "It was a boy named Marcus Webb who came forward," she said. "Ethan's best friend. He found the courage to tell the truth, even though it cost him everything." "Then we owe him too," Miguel said. "We owe him our gratitude, our forgiveness." "He's going to need it," Rena replied. "The road ahead is going to be hard for him. We'll help. Whatever he needs. He gave us our daughter back, not alive, but not forgotten. Not unavenged. He gave us justice." Justice. The word hung in the air, fragile and precious. It wouldn't bring Lily back. Nothing would bring Lily back. But it was something. And sometimes, in a world full of darkness and monsters and unspeakable cruelty, something was enough. The trial of Ethan Mercer began on September 14, 2020. 5 months after his arrest. 5 months of legal maneuvering, psychiatric evaluations, and relentless media coverage that transformed a small-town tragedy into a national obsession. The case had everything the public craved. A beautiful victim whose kindness made her death feel especially cruel. A golden boy defendant whose charm and intelligence masked something monstrous. A best friend turned witness whose testimony would determine whether justice prevailed or failed. Cable news networks devoted hours to analysis. True crime podcasts dissected every detail. Social media exploded with theories, opinions, and the peculiar bloodlust that accompanies high-profile murder trials. Crescent Ridge, once a quiet town that prided itself on anonymity, became the center of the universe. And at the heart of it all, 2 boys who had been inseparable since kindergarten prepared to face each other across a courtroom. One fighting for his freedom. One fighting for his soul. The Crescent Ridge County Courthouse was a century-old building of weathered limestone and soaring columns. On the first day of trial, it was surrounded by media trucks, protesters, and curious onlookers who had traveled from across the country to witness history. Police barriers kept the crowds at bay. Officers in tactical gear monitored the perimeter. Inside, the atmosphere was no less charged. The courtroom gallery was packed to capacity. Reporters occupied the front rows, laptops open, fingers poised. Behind them sat community members whose faces reflected the full spectrum of human emotion: grief, anger, morbid curiosity, desperate hope. The Castillo family occupied a reserved section near the front. Miguel sat rigid, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on the empty defendant's chair. Elena clutched her husband's hand, her face a mask of controlled anguish. Sophia, now 13 and far too old for her years, sat between her parents, her expression unreadable. And Rena Castillo sat at the prosecution table, officially present as a consulting witness, unofficially present as the guardian of her niece's memory. The defense table remained empty. For now. At precisely 9 a.m., the side door opened. Ethan Mercer entered the courtroom in a perfectly tailored navy suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his posture radiating the quiet confidence of a young man who had done nothing wrong. The transformation was remarkable. Gone was the hollow-eyed teenager who had been led away in handcuffs 5 months earlier. In his place stood someone who looked like a prep school valedictorian, clean-cut, respectful, the picture of wrongly accused innocence. His attorneys flanked him like bodyguards. Richard Mercer had spared no expense. The defense team included Harold Whitmore, one of the most successful criminal defense attorneys in the Midwest, and a supporting cast of associates, consultants, and expert witnesses whose combined hourly rate could have funded a small college. They were here to win. And looking at Ethan Mercer, calm, composed, utterly untroubled, it was easy to believe they might. The prosecution was led by District Attorney Catherine Walsh. She was 53 years old, silver-haired, sharp-featured, with a reputation for methodical preparation and devastating cross-examinations. She had won convictions in cases that seemed unwinnable. She had sent killers to death row on evidence far thinner than what she possessed against Ethan Mercer. But she had never faced a defendant quite like this. The challenge wasn't the evidence. The evidence was overwhelming. The notebook. The forensic analysis of Ethan's laptop, which revealed months of research into murder, forensic countermeasures, and Lily Castillo's personal information. The text messages from the burner phone, traced through digital forensics to Ethan's encrypted accounts. The timeline that placed him in the woods on the night of April 14th. The challenge was the defendant himself. Ethan Mercer was 15 years old at the time of the murder, young enough to evoke sympathy, old enough to be tried as an adult under Ohio law. He was handsome, articulate, and presented himself with a maturity that made it difficult to imagine him as a cold-blooded killer. More importantly, he was a master manipulator. Every gesture, every expression, every word that emerged from his mouth was calculated for maximum impact. He knew how to project innocence, knew how to make jurors question the evidence, doubt the witnesses, wonder if maybe, just maybe, they were about to convict an innocent boy. Catherine Walsh had no illusions about the difficulty ahead. This trial would be won or lost on the strength of one person's testimony. Marcus Webb. The first 3 days established the foundation. Opening statements painted competing narratives. The prosecution described a premeditated murder committed by a narcissistic teenager who couldn't accept rejection. The defense countered with a story of a troubled boy named Marcus Webb, jealous, unstable, willing to frame his best friend to cover his own involvement in Lily's death. The battle lines were drawn. Forensic experts testified about the crime scene, the evidence recovered from Ethan's room, the digital trail connecting him to the Tyler Morrison persona. Defense attorneys challenged every conclusion, raised doubts about chain of custody, suggested alternative interpretations. Character witnesses paraded through the stand. Teachers praised Ethan's intelligence, his leadership, his contributions to the community. They expressed disbelief that such a promising young man could be capable of violence. Other witnesses, classmates who had experienced Ethan's cruelty firsthand, told different stories. Derek Holloway testified about the planted evidence that destroyed his reputation. Megan Carpenter, tracked down after years of silence, described the calculated humiliation that had driven her from Crescent Ridge. The portrait that emerged was complex, contradictory. A golden boy whose shine concealed something darker. But portraits weren't proof. The case would rise or fall on what came next. On the 4th day of trial, Marcus Webb was called to the stand. The courtroom fell absolutely silent as he entered through the side door. He looked different than he had 7 months earlier. Thinner. Older. The boyish softness had been burned away, replaced by something harder, more angular. Dark circles under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights. A slight tremor in his hands spoke of constant anxiety. But his steps were steady as he walked to the witness stand. His voice was clear as he swore to tell the truth. And when he sat down and faced the courtroom, faced Ethan, sitting 20 feet away with those pale blue eyes locked onto his face, he did not look away. Something had changed in Marcus Webb. Something had hardened. The desperate, needy boy who had followed Ethan since kindergarten was gone. In his place sat someone who had walked through fire and emerged, scarred, but standing. D.A. Walsh approached the stand. Mr. Webb, can you describe your relationship with the defendant? Marcus took a breath, and then he began to talk. He spoke for 3 hours. He told the story from the beginning. The playground. The protection. The gradual ensnarement in a friendship that was really a prison. The small cruelties he had witnessed. The warning signs he had ignored. The desperate need for belonging that had blinded him to the monster in his midst. He described Ethan's obsession with Lily. The watching. The research. The rage after her rejection. The careful planning that Marcus had glimpsed but refused to understand. He described the alibi request, the story about the secret girlfriend, the specific date, April 14th. The way Ethan had manipulated Marcus's loyalty to secure an unshakable cover story. And then, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, he described the confrontation. "He told me he did it," Marcus said. "He confessed. Said Lily had to be taught a lesson. Said she saw through him when no one else could, and that was unacceptable." "What exactly did he say?" D.A. Walsh pressed. Marcus closed his eyes, the memory clearly painful. He said, "I planned. I prepared. I executed." He was proud of it, like it was an achievement, like she was just a problem he had solved. The courtroom was utterly silent. "And what did he say about your role?" "He said I was an accomplice, that I'd provided an alibi for a murder, that if I went to the police, I'd be destroyed along with him." Marcus opened his eyes, and they glistened with unshed tears. "He said we were partners, that we were in this together." "And how did you respond?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "I went to the police that same night, because Lily deserved better than my silence. Her family deserved better. The whole community deserved better." His gaze shifted to the Castillo family, sitting in the gallery. "I'm sorry I didn't come forward sooner. I'm sorry I was weak and scared and too desperate for his approval to do the right thing. But I'm here now, and I'm telling the truth." The cross-examination was brutal. Harold Whitmore approached the stand like a predator circling wounded prey. "Mr. Webb, you've admitted under oath that you provided a false alibi for the defendant on the night of the murder. Is that correct?" "Yes." "You lied to protect him?" "Yes." "For weeks?" "Yes." "While police searched desperately for a killer?" Marcus's voice was steady. "Yes." "So you're a liar." Whitmore let the word hang in the air. "By your own admission, you're willing to lie when it serves your purposes." "I lied to protect someone I thought was my friend. I'm telling the truth now to give justice to someone who deserved better." "Are you?" Whitmore raised an eyebrow. "Or are you lying again? Perhaps to protect yourself this time?" "I'm not." "The prosecution has offered you immunity from prosecution in exchange for your testimony. Isn't that correct?" Marcus hesitated. "Yes, but—" "So you have a powerful incentive to say whatever the prosecution wants you to say. To point the finger at Ethan Mercer and save yourself from prison. That's not what's happening, isn't it?" Whitmore moved closer, his voice dropping to something almost sympathetic. "Mr. Webb, you've described yourself as desperate for approval. Easily manipulated. Someone who would do anything to belong. Is it possible that you're being manipulated right now? By prosecutors who needed a scapegoat and found a vulnerable boy willing to say anything to avoid punishment?" "No." "Is it possible that you're the one who killed Lily Castillo? That you became obsessed with her, just as you claim Ethan did? That you're framing your best friend to escape justice for your own crime?" "No." Marcus's voice rose, cracking with emotion. "I didn't kill anyone. Ethan confessed to me. He told me exactly what he did. A confession with no witnesses. No recording. No evidence whatsoever except your word." Whitmore shook his head sadly. The word of a self-admitted liar who has every reason to point the finger at someone else. He turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, I submit that Marcus Webb is not a heroic witness finally telling the truth. He's a desperate young man willing to destroy his best friend to save himself." Marcus was trembling now. But he didn't break. "I know what I heard," he said, his voice hoarse but unwavering. "I know what Ethan told me. And I know what he did to Lily. You can attack me all you want. You can call me a liar, a coward, a manipulator. Maybe I'm all of those things. But I'm also telling the truth. And somewhere, deep down, you know it." The testimony concluded at 4:47 p.m. Marcus stepped down from the stand on shaky legs, drained beyond exhaustion. As he walked past the defense table, he made the mistake of looking at Ethan. Those pale blue eyes were waiting for him. Cold. Calculating. Promising retribution. "You'll pay for this," those eyes said. "Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But eventually. I'll make sure of it." Marcus kept walking. Out of the courtroom. Away from the cameras and the crowds and the weight of the world's attention. He had done what he came to do. The rest was out of his hands. The trial continued for another week. Expert witnesses debated the evidence. Character witnesses offered competing visions of who Ethan Mercer really was. Attorneys delivered closing arguments that distilled months of testimony into competing narratives of guilt and innocence. And then, finally, the jury retired to deliberate. The wait was agony. 1 day. 2 days. 3. Every hour that passed felt like a verdict in itself. Was the jury struggling to convict? Were they swayed by the defense's attacks on Marcus's credibility? Was Ethan Mercer going to walk free? The Castillo family gathered at Miguel and Elena's house, surrounded by friends and community members who had sustained them through the worst year of their lives. They prayed. They waited. They tried not to imagine a world where Lily's killer escaped justice. On the 4th day, word came. The jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom had never been so full. Every seat was occupied. Every inch of standing room was claimed. Reporters pressed against the walls, cameras forbidden but notebooks ready. Outside, hundreds of people gathered around speakers that would broadcast the verdict to a community that had waited 18 months for this moment. 18 months since Lily Castillo was found in the woods. 18 months of grief, investigation, arrest, and trial. 18 months of wondering whether justice would prevail or fail. And now, finally, the answer was coming. Marcus Webb sat in the gallery, 3 rows behind the prosecution table. He hadn't planned to attend the verdict. The trial had drained him, emotionally, physically, spiritually. Every day in that courtroom had been a new form of torture. The cross-examination. The defense's attacks on his character. The constant weight of Ethan's gaze, tracking him, measuring him, promising retribution. But when the call came that a verdict had been reached, Marcus found himself driving to the courthouse without conscious decision. He needed to see it end. Needed to know that his testimony, his betrayal of the only friend he'd ever had meant something. Needed to watch the mask finally fall from Ethan Mercer's face. So he sat in the gallery, hands clasped between his knees, heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears, waiting for the moment of truth. The Castillo family sat directly behind the prosecution table. Miguel and Elena held hands, their knuckles white with pressure. Sophia sat between them, no longer a child but not yet an adult, frozen in the terrible limbo of adolescent grief. Rena Castillo sat at the end of the row, her detective's composure barely concealing the storm of emotion beneath. They had waited so long, prayed so hard, sacrificed so much. Lily's absence was a physical presence among them, an empty chair, an unspoken name, a wound that would never fully heal. But today, perhaps, they would find something close to peace. Today, perhaps, justice would speak. The side door opened, and Ethan Mercer was led into the courtroom. He wore the same navy suit he'd worn throughout the trial, perfectly pressed, perfectly fitted, projecting the image of innocent youth wrongly accused. His handcuffs were removed at the defense table, and he sat down between his attorneys with the calm composure of someone attending a routine business meeting. Only his eyes betrayed anything beneath the surface. Those pale blue eyes swept the courtroom, cataloging faces, measuring reactions. They lingered on the Castillo family, assessing their tension, perhaps savoring their anxiety. They passed over the jury box, analyzing each face for clues about what was coming. And then they found Marcus. For a long moment, Ethan simply stared. No expression. No acknowledgement. Just that cold, reptilian gaze that had haunted Marcus's nightmares for months. "You did this," those eyes said. "Whatever happens next is your fault. And I will never forget." Marcus forced himself not to look away. He had spent his entire life flinching from confrontation, backing down, seeking approval rather than standing his ground. That version of Marcus Webb was dead. Whoever emerged from this trial would be someone different. Someone stronger. Someone forged in fire. The bailiff's voice cut through the tension. All rise. The Honorable Judge Patricia Hammond presiding. The courtroom stood as one. Judge Hammond entered through her private door, black robes flowing, her weathered face revealing nothing. She had presided over the trial with iron control, permitting no outbursts, tolerating no theatrics, keeping the proceedings focused on evidence and law rather than emotion and spectacle. She took her seat. The courtroom sat. Members of the jury, Judge Hammond said, have you reached a verdict? The jury foreman, a middle-aged man with graying temples and kind eyes, rose from his seat. We have, Your Honor. Please hand the verdict form to the bailiff. The paper changed hands. Bailiff to judge. Judge Hammond studied it for a long moment, her expression unchanged. Then she handed it back to the bailiff, who returned it to the foreman. The defendant will rise. Ethan Mercer stood. His attorneys flanked him, their faces carefully neutral. The courtroom held its collective breath. Mr. Foreman, Judge Hammond said, please read the verdict. The foreman's voice was steady. In the matter of the State of Ohio versus Ethan Alexander Mercer, on the sole count of murder in the first degree, we the jury find the defendant. Time stopped. Everything stopped. Marcus's heart. The whispered prayers of the Castillo family. The scratch of reporters' pens. The entire world seemed to pause, balanced on the edge of a single word. Guilty. The courtroom erupted. Sobs from the gallery. Gasps from the press section. A wail from Elena Castillo that carried 18 months of grief, rage, and desperate hope finally finding release. Miguel wrapped his arms around his wife, his own tears streaming freely. Sophia buried her face in her mother's shoulder, her small body shaking. Rena Castillo sat frozen, one hand pressed to her mouth, her eyes fixed on the defendant's table where justice had finally been delivered. The judge's gavel pounded repeatedly. Order. Order in the court. Gradually, the chaos subsided, but not the emotion. The air itself seemed charged with it, relief, vindication, grief renewed by the official confirmation of what everyone had known but needed to hear spoken aloud. Lily Castillo was dead, and her killer had been found guilty. Ethan Mercer stood motionless at the defense table. For 14 months, since his arrest, through his incarceration, throughout the trial, he had maintained perfect composure. The mask had never slipped. The performance had never faltered. Even when confronted with overwhelming evidence, even when his former best friend detailed his confession on the witness stand, Ethan had projected only calm, wronged innocence. Now, for the first time, the mask cracked. It wasn't dramatic. No screaming. No lunging. No theatrical breakdown for the cameras. Just a slight tremor in his jaw. A flicker of something raw and ugly in those pale blue eyes. The faintest fracture in the perfect facade he had maintained his entire life. For a moment, just a moment, the real Ethan Mercer was visible. Not the golden boy. Not the honor student. Not the charming young man who had fooled an entire community. Something else. Something empty. Something that had never been human at all. Then his attorney leaned in, whispered something, and the mask slid back into place. But everyone had seen it. The jury. The gallery. The reporters whose articles would describe that moment in vivid detail. Ethan Mercer had finally been exposed. Judge Hammond waited for silence to fully settle before speaking. The defendant is remanded to custody pending sentencing. Given the defendant's age at the time of the offense and the severity of the crime, I am ordering a comprehensive pre-sentencing evaluation. Sentencing will occur in 30 days. She turned to the jury. Members of the jury, the court thanks you for your service. You are dismissed. Then, with a final strike of her gavel, court is adjourned. The aftermath was chaos. Reporters shouted questions that would go unanswered. Camera crews positioned outside captured every emergence from the courthouse doors. Legal analysts began their endless dissection of what the verdict meant, what the sentencing might bring, what appeals might be filed. But Marcus Webb experienced none of it. He sat frozen in his seat as the courtroom emptied around him, unable to move, unable to process the magnitude of what had just happened. Guilty. Ethan was guilty. The testimony had worked. The truth had prevailed. The monster who had destroyed Lily Castillo, and nearly destroyed Marcus along with her, would face justice. It was over. After 18 months of nightmares, guilt, and constant fear, it was finally over. The tears came without warning. Marcus had cried before, in the police station, during his testimony, in the privacy of his room when the weight of everything became too much. But this was different. This was release. This was the dam finally breaking, the poison finally draining, the burden finally lifting from shoulders that had carried it far too long. He wept. Openly. Unashamedly. And for the first time since April 14, 2019, he felt something other than fear and guilt. He felt free. A hand touched his shoulder. Marcus looked up, expecting his mother. Diane had attended every day of the trial, sitting in the back row, supporting her son through the worst experience of his life. But it wasn't his mother. It was Rena Castillo, the detective who had never stopped hunting, the aunt who had lost her niece to senseless violence, the woman whose investigation had finally brought a killer to justice. She stood beside Marcus, her own eyes red with tears, her expression carrying something he hadn't expected. Gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. The words hit Marcus like a physical force. "I don't deserve," he started. "Yes, you do." Rena's voice was firm. "You made mistakes. You were weak when you should have been strong. You let fear control you for too long. All of that is true." She sat down in the empty seat beside him. "But when it mattered, when everything was on the line, you found your courage. You walked into that police station. You told the truth. You faced Ethan in that courtroom and refused to back down, even when his lawyers tried to destroy you." She placed her hand over his. Lily would have understood. She knew what it was like to be trapped by circumstances, by relationships, by expectations. She spent her whole life helping people find their way out of darkness. Rena's voice cracked. "In a way, Marcus, you honored her memory. You became the person she would have helped you become. The person who chooses truth over comfort, courage over fear, justice over self-preservation." Marcus couldn't speak. The tears flowed faster. "My family wants to meet you," Rena continued. "Not today. Today is for processing, for grieving, for beginning to heal. But soon. Miguel and Elena want to thank you personally. They want you to know that they forgive you. That they understand." "I don't know if I can forgive myself," Marcus whispered. "That's the hardest part," Rena agreed. "It takes time. It takes work. It takes learning to separate who you were from who you're becoming." She squeezed his hand. "But you'll get there. I believe that. And I think Lily would have believed it too." Across the courtroom, the side door opened one final time. Ethan Mercer, handcuffed once again, was led toward the exit by two uniformed officers. He moved with the same composed grace he had displayed throughout the trial, back straight, head high, refusing to appear defeated even in defeat. But as he passed the gallery, his eyes found Marcus one last time. The look lasted only a second. But in that second, Marcus saw everything. The fury. The betrayal. The cold, calculating promise of revenge that no verdict could extinguish. "This isn't over," those eyes said. "Not for you. Not ever. I'll remember this. I'll remember you. And someday, somehow, you'll pay." Then the officers guided Ethan through the door, and he was gone. Marcus shuddered. The threat was real. He knew that. Even behind bars, even facing decades of imprisonment, Ethan Mercer was dangerous. The kind of intelligence that had planned Lily's murder could plan other things too. Patient things. Long-term things. But Marcus refused to let fear control him anymore. He had spent 10 years as Ethan's shadow. He would not spend the rest of his life as Ethan's victim. Whatever came next, whatever challenges, whatever threats, whatever darkness still waited in his future, Marcus would face it standing up. For himself. For his mother. For Lily. And for the person he was finally becoming. Outside the courthouse, the sun was setting. Golden light painted the limestone columns and weathered steps. The crowds were dispersing, the media trucks packing up, the circus of justice finally folding its tents. Marcus emerged into the fading warmth and found his mother waiting. Diane Webb stood at the bottom of the steps, her face tear-streaked but radiant with relief. She opened her arms as Marcus approached, and he fell into them like a child, like the small, scared boy who had always needed someone to protect him. But he wasn't that boy anymore. He was something else now. Something stronger. "It's over," Diane whispered into his hair. "It's finally over, baby. You did so good. I'm so proud of you." Marcus held his mother tighter. "I love you, Mom." "I love you too, sweetheart. More than anything in this world." They stood there for a long moment, mother and son, survivors of a nightmare that had tested everything they had. Then, together, they walked toward the parking lot. Toward the car that would take them home. Toward a future that, for the first time in 18 months, felt possible. 5 years later. The campus of Ohio State University sprawled beneath an October sky, its limestone buildings glowing amber in the afternoon light. Students crossed the main quad in waves, hurrying to lectures, lounging on benches, living the ordinary lives of young people with futures still unwritten. Among them walked a young man who no longer flinched at shadows. Marcus Webb was 21 years old now. The gangly, anxious teenager who had trembled on the witness stand had been replaced by someone steadier. Broader in the shoulders. Calmer in the eyes. He moved through the crowd with the quiet confidence of a person who had faced the worst and survived. He was a junior, majoring in criminal psychology. The irony wasn't lost on him. 4 years, he had been controlled by someone who understood psychology as a weapon. Someone who had manipulated his desperate need for belonging, exploited his childhood wounds, transformed him into an unwitting accomplice to murder. Now Marcus studied those same principles, not to manipulate, but to understand. To recognize the warning signs he had missed. To help others escape the traps he had nearly died in. It was, in its way, a form of penance. And perhaps, eventually, a form of healing. The therapy had helped. 3 years of weekly sessions with Dr. Eleanor Vance, a trauma specialist who had guided Marcus through the labyrinth of guilt, grief, and residual fear that had threatened to consume him after the trial. The work was brutal. Confronting his complicity. Acknowledging the ways he had enabled Ethan's behavior long before Lily's murder. Unpacking the childhood wounds that had made him so vulnerable to manipulation in the first place. There were setbacks. Dark nights when the old shame returned with crushing force. Moments when Marcus wondered if he would ever feel truly clean, truly forgiven, truly free of the shadow that had defined his adolescence. But Dr. Vance had been patient. "Healing isn't linear," she told him once. "It's not a mountain you climb until you reach the summit and declare victory. It's more like tending a garden. Some days the flowers bloom. Some days the weeds return. The work never really ends, but it does get easier." Marcus held on to those words. On the good days, when he could look in the mirror without seeing Ethan's shadow behind him, he believed them. On the bad days, and there were still bad days, he repeated them like a mantra until the darkness passed. His mother had remarried. Diane Webb, who had sacrificed so much to raise her children alone, had finally found someone worthy of her strength. His name was Robert Chen, a quiet, kind widower who taught history at the local community college and looked at Diane like she was the most precious thing in the universe. Marcus had been suspicious at first. After everything he'd experienced with Ethan, the false charm, the hidden darkness, the masks that concealed monsters, he had developed a hypervigilance around new people in his life. But Robert was genuine. Transparently, uncomplicatedly genuine. He didn't try to replace Marcus's absent father or force a relationship that Marcus wasn't ready for. He simply loved Diane, treated her children with respect, and demonstrated through countless small actions that he was exactly what he appeared to be. The wedding had been small, a backyard ceremony with close friends and family. Marcus had given a toast that made his mother cry. His sister, now 16 and thriving in high school, had served as maid of honor. It was the first purely happy day Marcus could remember in years. The Castillo family had kept their promise. 3 months after the verdict, when the media attention had finally faded and something like normalcy had begun to return, Rena Castillo had called Marcus with an invitation. "My brother wants to meet you," she said. "He and Elena. They want to thank you personally." Marcus had nearly refused. The thought of facing Lily's parents, looking into the eyes of the people whose daughter he had helped bury, even indirectly, seemed unbearable. What could he possibly say? How could he accept their gratitude when he still struggled to forgive himself? But his therapist had encouraged him to go. "Closure isn't just for them," Dr. Vance said. "It's for you too. Facing the people you've hurt and accepting their forgiveness is part of the healing process." So Marcus went. The Castillo home was modest and warm, filled with photographs of a smiling girl who would never grow older. Elena had prepared a meal: enchiladas, rice, beans, all of Lily's favorites. Miguel had shaken Marcus's hand with a grip that communicated more than words ever could. They talked for hours. About Lily. About the investigation. About the trial and its aftermath. About grief and guilt and the long, winding road toward acceptance. "We don't blame you," Elena said at one point, reaching across the table to take Marcus's hand. "We blamed you once, in the beginning, when we learned about the alibi." The anger it was overwhelming. Her eyes glistened. But anger doesn't bring her back. Blame doesn't bring her back. And watching you testify, seeing what it cost you to tell the truth, we understood. You were a victim too. Different from Lily, yes. But a victim nonetheless. Miguel nodded, his voice rough with emotion. "You gave us justice, Marcus. When it mattered most, you chose truth over self-preservation. That's what we remember. That's what Lily would have remembered." Marcus had broken down completely. Sobbed at the table while Lily's parents held him, 3 people bound together by tragedy, finding something like grace in the wreckage of their lives. He still visited them sometimes. Not often, the memories were still too raw for frequent contact, but enough to maintain the connection. Enough to remind himself that forgiveness was possible, that redemption was real, that the darkest chapters of his story didn't have to define its ending. Sofia Castillo was 18 now. She had graduated high school the previous spring, valedictorian, just like her sister would have been. She was attending community college, planning to transfer to a 4-year university, studying social work because she wanted to help people the way Lily had helped people. The grief had changed her, made her older, wiser, more serious than most teenagers. But it had also given her purpose. She spoke at schools about violence and loss, volunteered at crisis hotlines, channeled her pain into action because action was the only thing that made the pain bearable. She and Marcus exchanged messages occasionally. Nothing deep or profound, just the casual check-ins of 2 people who shared a bond that neither had chosen but both acknowledged. "Hey, how are classes going?" "Good." "Busy." "You?" "Taking too many credits. Mom says I'm going to burn out." Moms worry. It's their job. True. Talk soon. Yeah. Take care of yourself. Small exchanges. Simple words. But they mattered. They were proof that connection was possible. That the isolation Ethan had cultivated in Marcus, the deliberate severing of other relationships to ensure total dependency, had been broken. Marcus had people now. Real people. People who knew his worst moments and chose to remain. It was more than he had ever dared to hope for. Ethan Mercer was still in prison. The sentence had been severe, life with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Given that he was 15 at the time of the murder, tried as an adult but with some consideration for his age, the parole possibility was mandated by evolving juvenile justice standards. 25 years. Ethan would be 40 years old, at minimum, before he had any chance of freedom. Marcus tried not to think about it. The parole hearing was decades away. The appeals had been exhausted. The legal system had done its job, and there was nothing more Marcus could do except live his life and trust that the walls would hold. But sometimes, late at night, the fear crept back. Ethan was still out there. Still alive. Still brilliant in his twisted way. still capable of patience and planning and the long game that had always been his specialty. Would he spend 25 years plotting revenge? Would he find ways to reach beyond the prison walls, to manipulate others into doing his bidding? Would Marcus ever truly be free of the shadow that had consumed his childhood? He didn't know. No one could know. All he could do was live each day as it came, build a life worth protecting, and refuse to let fear become his prison the way loyalty had once been. Every April 14th, Marcus drove to Crescent Ridge. The town had changed in 5 years. New businesses on Main Street. New families in old houses. A new generation of students filling the halls of Crescent Ridge High School, most of them too young to remember the tragedy that had once consumed the community. Time moved on. Wounds healed. The world forgot. But Marcus remembered. He would park at the edge of the woods behind the school, the same woods where Lily had taken her final walk, where her life had ended in fog and darkness and terror. He would follow the trail to the clearing by the creek, now marked by a simple stone memorial that the Castillo family had erected. Lily Maria Castillo, 2001 to 2019. Sunshine made human. Forever loved. Forever missed. Marcus would sit beside the stone for an hour, sometimes 2. He didn't pray. He had never been particularly religious. He didn't speak aloud. He had never been comfortable with that kind of ritual. He simply sat and remembered. The girl whose kindness had been weaponized against her. The friend whose loyalty had been exploited. The monster who had hidden behind a perfect mask. The community that had refused to see the warning signs. The investigation that had almost failed. The testimony that had almost not happened. All of it. Every piece of the tragedy that had shaped his life. He remembered so that he would never forget. So that Lily would never be forgotten. So that the lessons written in blood would never fade from his consciousness. This year, he brought wildflowers. A bouquet of daisies and sunflowers, cheerful and bright, the kind of flowers Lily would have loved. He placed them at the base of the memorial stone and sat back on his heels, letting the October breeze wash over him. The woods were peaceful now. The fog that haunted his memories was absent today, replaced by golden sunlight filtering through leaves that had just begun to turn. Birds sang in the branches above. The creek murmured its endless song. It was beautiful. Terribly, heartbreakingly beautiful. "I'm still here," Marcus said quietly. He hadn't planned to speak. The words just came. "I'm still trying to be better. Still trying to be the person you would have helped me become. I don't know if I'm succeeding. Most days, I can't tell. But I'm trying." A leaf drifted down from above, landing gently on the memorial stone. "Your family is doing okay. Your mom and dad, they're healing. Slowly, but they're healing. Sophia is incredible. She's so much like you. I think you'd be proud of her." Marcus's voice cracked. "I think about you a lot. Not just on this day, but all the time. Every time I help someone in my classes, every time I recognize a warning sign that someone else might miss, every time I choose truth when it would be easier to look away, I think about you." He wiped his eyes. "You saved me, Lily. I know that sounds strange, because I couldn't save you. But your death, and everything that came after, it broke something in me. Something that needed to be broken. The part that needed Ethan's approval more than my own conscience. The part that would rather be comfortable than right." He took a shaky breath. "I'm not that person anymore. I'm someone new. Someone better. And I have you to thank for that. You and your family and everyone who gave me a chance to become who I was supposed to be." He pressed his hand to the stone. "Cold. Solid. Permanent. I'll never forget you. I promise. As long as I live, I'll carry your memory with me. And I'll try, every single day, to honor it." He stayed for another hour, watching the light change, listening to the forest, letting the peace of the place wash over him. Then, as the sun began to set, he rose and walked back toward his car. The drive home was quiet. No music. No podcasts. Just the hum of the engine and the rhythm of the road. Marcus thought about the future. graduate school, eventually. A career in forensic psychology or victim advocacy, something that would let him use his experience to help others. Maybe a family someday, if he found someone willing to accept the complicated history that would always be part of him. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing worth having ever was. But it would be his. A life built on truth, on courage, on the daily choice to be better than his worst moments. The road stretched ahead, winding through hills painted gold by autumn light. And for the first time in years, Marcus Webb felt something he had almost forgotten was possible. Hope. Some bonds must be broken to set the truth free. Some shadows must be escaped to find the light. Some wounds never fully heal, but they can become sources of strength, reminders of survival, proof that the human spirit can endure even the darkest nights. Marcus Webb had been Ethan Mercer's shadow for 10 years. He had been complicit in a monster's crimes. He had carried guilt that nearly crushed him. But he had also found the courage to speak, to testify, to choose justice over safety, truth over loyalty, redemption over despair. And in doing so, he had discovered something unexpected. Himself. The real Marcus Webb. Not the desperate, approval-seeking shadow. Not the complicit bystander who looked away from darkness. But someone new. Someone brave. Someone worthy of the second chance he had been given. The road home wound through autumn hills, and Marcus drove toward a future finally free from the past. Behind him, in a clearing in the woods, wildflowers swayed in the evening breeze. And Lily Castillo's memory lived on, not just in stone, but in the hearts of everyone who had loved her. Forever. We've reached the end of this journey together. A journey through darkness and light, betrayal and redemption, evil and the courage that ultimately defeats it. If this story moved you, if it made you think, made you feel, made you appreciate the ordinary moments of safety and connection that we so often take for granted, I want to ask you one final thing. Share it. Share it with someone who needs to hear that courage is possible even in the darkest circumstances. That redemption is real even after terrible mistakes. That the truth, however painful, is always worth telling. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Leave a comment telling me what this story meant to you. And keep coming back, because there are more stories to tell. Stories of monsters and heroes, of shadows and light, of the endless human capacity for both darkness and grace. Thank you for walking this road with me. Until next time, stay safe, stay brave, and never forget, the truth will always find its way to light.